Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little spicy, but also deeply unsettling. You're heading back to the year 30 AD, a time when a single glance, a forbidden touch, or even a whispered rumour about your private life could literally get you executed. Think sandals, scrolls, strong body odour, and a legal system that makes modern-day gossip look like kindergarten. This isn't the age of Netflix and chill, it's more like stoning and scream. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is right now. I'm guessing late at night. Maybe your room's dim, maybe you've got earbuds in, maybe you're lying there, blinking up at the ceiling and ready to drift. That's perfect. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive barefoot, dust coating your ankles, squinting into the bright heat of Judea. It's dry, the kind of dry that scrapes at your throat with each breath. There's the occasional shout from a vendor, the bleating of goats, the distant ring of a Roman soldier's armour shifting as he walks. Everything smells like sweat, cumin and sun-dried fish. You're in Jerusalem, but not the pretty Instagram-filtered one from religious textbooks. This one's alive, loud, crowded and tense. It's the year 30 AD. Judea is a province under Roman rule, but it isn't happy about it. Roman soldiers occupy the cities. They enforce order, collect taxes, and protect their own interests. But the real story, your story tonight, isn't about military politics. It's about what happens when sex becomes a matter of life and death. And tonight, in this place, it absolutely does. Imagine waking up every day with the knowledge that your entire social standing, your safety, your right to live could be snatched away based on who you sleep with, or who someone thinks you sleep with. There are no dating apps, no privacy, no what happens in Vegas. Everything you do, especially if you're a woman, is observed, judged, and whispered about. Virginity isn't a personal choice, it's a family's reputation, and losing it outside of marriage, that's not just scandalous, that's deadly. You pass through the marketplace, where women in layered robes and veils gather fruit under the watchful eyes of their mothers and neighbours. Men chat in small groups, their heads wrapped in linen, occasionally glancing toward the Roman guards but mostly ignoring them. Over by the edge of the square, a small group of Pharisees debates some finer point of religious law, gesturing with scrolls, brows furrowed in righteous intensity. You, a time traveller with zero legal training but a decent modern moral compass, might be tempted to think, surely people aren't executed just for sex. But here's the thing. They are. And not just by overzealous vigilantes. Religious law, specifically Jewish law, interpreted strictly, states that adultery is punishable by death. Same with premarital sex in some cases, depending on the circumstances. These aren't empty threats. People have died for this. And worse. The law isn't exactly evenly applied. If you're a man caught cheating, especially a wealthy one, there's a solid chance you walk away with a stern word and maybe a temple donation. If you're a woman, different story. You might be dragged through the streets, your hair torn out, your clothes shredded by angry neighbours, and if the law comes down on you fully, yeah, you probably won't survive this. There's this one case that still gets whispered about. A woman accused of adultery, never publicly named in scripture, dragged before a crowd of men holding stones. The tension hangs like heat over desert sand. And then a teacher, young, enigmatic and very much on the Roman watch list, steps forward. He doesn't scream or preach. He just says, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." No one moves. Eventually they drop the stones one by one. That teacher? Yeah, that's Jesus. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now you're just trying to wrap your head around this world. A world where sexual desire is treated like a bomb with a short fuse. And the most fragile part of the fuse? Honour. Family honour, personal honour, male honour. Honour is currency here. It's why fathers control their daughters' marriages. It's why brides are inspected, yes, inspected for signs of virginity. There are entire rituals for proving it. And if she fails that test, even if the test itself is flawed, another public shaming. Or worse. Fun fringe fact. There's a weird little rule buried deep in tradition that if a man accuses his bride of not being a virgin and she proves him wrong, he gets whipped in public and fined 100 shekels. So, a tiny win. Kinda. Not really. And here's something scholars still debate to this day. Just how often were these extreme punishments actually carried out? Was stoning for adultery symbolic, reserved only for the most egregious cases? Or was it disturbingly common, a public warning played out with real bodies in real town squares? There are theories. Some believe it happened regularly, quietly. Others argue that by 30 AD, Roman oversight had softened some of these sentences. We just don't know. But what we do know is that fear controlled people. Fear of exposure, fear of dishonour, fear of being on the wrong side of the law, or of a mob, or of both. Especially if you were poor, especially if you were a woman, and in a world without phones, without cameras, without court appeals, once a rumour started, good luck stopping it. You keep walking now through narrower streets. A group of young men stare at you a second too long. You look away, because you know the rules. You've been warned, even I. Contact can be a kind of suggestion here. Even your posture, your silence, your beauty, everything can be twisted into guilt. So you keep your head down, you keep moving. And you wonder, in a world like this, how does anyone love without fear? It doesn't take long before you feel the weight of empire pressing down on this land. The air may shimmer with heat, but under that is something colder. Control. Judea in 30. AD is a province under the vast shadow of the Roman Empire, and its influence creeps into every crevice, including the bedroom. You feel it in the streets. The language of power is Latin, even though the locals mostly speak Aramaic and Hebrew. Roman coins clink in merchant hands, stamped with the emperor's face, a reminder of who owns everything, including indirectly the laws around your body. The Romans don't care much about your religion, not directly. They're surprisingly pragmatic that way. Worship what you want, they say. Just pay your taxes, don't cause riots, and remember who's boss. But that's only the surface, because when you scratch at the paint, what you find is a tangled power struggle between local tradition and imperial rule. The Romans didn't come here to micromanage purity rituals or who slept with whom, but when those things start causing unrest, then it becomes their problem, and unrest is bubbling, always. You can hear it in the market whispers, see it in the way locals cross the street to avoid Roman patrols. The Jewish people have their own deep, ancient laws that long predate Roman conquest, laws about morality, about family, about sex. These laws are enforced by religious leaders, not Roman governors. But when punishment includes execution, that's when the Romans draw a line. Technically, under Roman law, Jews in Judea aren't allowed to carry out death sentences. Only Roman authorities can do that. But let's just say that rule's more of a strong suggestion. In practice, especially in smaller towns, people still take justice into their own hands. If a woman is caught in adultery, or even suspected, there's no trial in the Roman courts. There's just community judgment, public shame, and possibly a stone with your name on it. So what's the Roman stance on sex? Oh, they've got a whole different flavour of sin. Roman sexual culture is all about hierarchy. Power determines what's allowed. A Roman man can sleep with slaves, mistresses, even other men, as long as he plays the dominant role and doesn't disrupt the social order. Consent isn't exactly part of the vocabulary. For elites, sex is about status, not morality. Fidelity in marriage is expected, sort of, but not universally practiced, and certainly not enforced like it is in Judea. But here's the twist. Even in the midst of their libertine culture, Rome isn't immune to anxiety about sexuality. Augustus, the emperor just before this era, actually passed laws aimed at promoting family values and discouraging adultery, though again, those rules mostly targeted women. It's always the women. So now picture this. A rigid moral code from ancient Hebrew law that demands purity, obedience and punishment, smashed against a Roman system that's bureaucratic, patriarchal and weirdly permissive. You end up with a society where hypocrisy thrives. A man might visit a brothel in Caesarea and then stone a woman in Nazareth for getting pregnant out of wedlock. It's a legal and cultural double standard, institutionalized and enforced by violence. That tension, it's visible on the streets. Look at the soldiers, foreign, armoured, arrogant, and then look at the locals, many of whom walk barefoot, wearing homespun cloth, heads lowered. The empire is always watching, even when it's pretending not to care. You can't put people under occupation for decades and expect things to stay peaceful. And when sexuality becomes political, as it always does, it gets dangerous fast. Some scholars debate whether Rome intentionally used moral enforcement as a tool of control. Did they quietly encourage local religious leaders to police morality harshly, to keep people distracted and obedient? Or were they just tolerating the chaos so long as no one threatened Caesar's tax revenue? We can't be sure, but we know this. Fear of divine punishment was useful. Keep people afraid of sin, and they'll fall in line. Keep women terrified of dishonouring their families, and they won't question power. And then there are the taxes. Yes, this ties in. Stay with me. Taxes were heavy, especially on the poor. Every year, Jewish households had to pay tribute to Rome, temple taxes to religious authorities, and levies on goods and animals. If you couldn't pay, your land could be seized, your family sold into debt slavery. The stress of survival only deepens the desperation, and desperation leads people into corners, relationships hidden in shadows, pregnancies concealed, alliances forged in secret. And when these secrets come to light, the punishment is swift. Now let's not forget the Roman soldiers themselves. They're not exactly models of virtue. Stationed far from home, bored and underpaid, many of them engage in what today we'd call sexual exploitation. Locals have no legal protection against a soldier's demands. There are whispers, even in sacred places, of temple maidens being assaulted, of families handing over daughters in exchange for mercy or favour. But again, Rome pretends not to see, unless it disrupts public order. Fringe fact time. Did you know some Roman military camps had designated brothels? Completely legal, often government regulated. Meanwhile, just a few miles away in a Jewish village, a woman who's even rumoured to have slept outside marriage could be killed by her own father. It's like living on a tectonic fault line of sexual morality. One step too far, and the whole ground shifts beneath you. You walk past the fortress. Now Antonia Fortress, looming near the Temple Mount, home to Roman garrisons. From its towers, soldiers can look down into the temple courtyards. It's a brutal architectural metaphor. Rome watching religion, power staring down piety, and caught in between, ordinary people trying to live, love, and not die in the process. You feel that tension in your chest, not just fear, but also the unbearable weight of silence. No one talks openly about desire here. Not really. It's hidden, whispered, buried beneath layers of ritual law and social code. But it's there, burning under the surface like coals in a brazier. And when it bursts out, when someone crosses the line, it explodes in public spectacle. So what happens when two worlds, two moral systems collide like this? You get a society always on edge. People policing each other, women whispering behind walls, men posturing in public, sinning in secret, and always, always, the threat of exposure, of punishment, of death. You move through the city, the weight of empire pressing in like stone walls narrowing around you, and suddenly, sex doesn't feel private anymore. It feels like a public danger. One mistake, one accusation, and everything, your name, your family, your future, is on the line. You head downhill now, past homes carved into the slopes, where courtyards fill with the scent of baking bread and the dry rustle of fig trees. But your path doesn't just follow the dust-stamped streets. It slips beneath the surface of this world, to the conflict pulsing at its core. It's not just Romans and locals clashing over taxes and rule, it's something deeper, the law. Specifically, whose law? By 30 AD, Judea is like a double-exposed photo. Two legal systems are layered over each other, barely aligned and always in tension. The first is Roman civil law, imposed by the empire, written in Latin, enforced by soldiers, and mostly uninterested in spiritual purity. The second is Jewish religious law, ancient, exacting, written in Hebrew, and enforced by elders, priests, and public pressure. The problem is, when it comes to sex, these two systems don't just disagree, they openly contradict each other. Here's the simplest example: adultery. According to Jewish law, particularly the Torah and its priestly interpretations, it's punishable by death. Full stop. If a married woman has sex with anyone who isn't her husband and there are witnesses, that's it. She's done. Public stoning, shame for the family, ritual cleansing of the community by blood. It's all very dramatic and public and final. Now, the Roman law books, They aren't thrilled about infidelity either, especially when it involves disrupting inheritance or insulting a powerful man's ego. But they don't approve of stonings. Romans saw themselves as civilized conquerors, not barbaric executioners. In theory, Jewish leaders had to get Roman permission to carry out capital punishment. In practice, let's say that if no, one important notice, things still happened. There's even a popular Roman saying floating around at the time, let the provinces handle their own weirdness, unless it gets noisy. Which, works until someone gets publicly executed for something Rome considers a personal matter. Then suddenly, the governor gets involved. The soldiers show up, and people disappear. You stop at the edge of a square where a crowd is murmuring. Two rabbis stand in a heated debate under a fig tree, their scrolls rolled tightly in hand. One gestures furiously, the other shakes his head, calm but firm. You inch closer, pretending to inspect dates at a nearby cart, but you're listening. They're arguing about a case. A young woman, maybe 15, has been accused of sleeping with her betrothed before the final wedding ceremony. It's scandalous, sure, but she insists they were already promised to each other. The man doesn't deny it, but his family is furious. Their status is at risk. Her family can't pay back the bride price. And the priest at the local synagogue, he wants to send her before the elders. Now here's the kicker. Under Roman law, technically, she can't be executed. But the local community, they might resolve it before the Romans even find out. In other words, she could be taken outside town, and what happens there will never be recorded. Maybe she disappears. Maybe she lives, but never marries, never shows her face again. Either way, her life as she knew it, gone. And that's the core of the clash. The law of empire versus the law of God. For many religious leaders, obeying Roman law is a compromise, a necessary evil. But when moral issues are at stake, like sex, they push back. They consider Roman permissiveness a moral rot, a danger to Jewish identity. Rome shrugs at a man sleeping with his servant. Jewish law, in theory, has no tolerance for that, especially if it violates purity or status boundaries. But guess who usually wins in this legal tug-of-war? Spoiler, not the people on the bottom of the social ladder, not the poor, and definitely not women. Take this fringe case that's been passed around like a dark parable. A man accused his wife of adultery based on a dream he had. A dream, no witnesses, no evidence, just a vision in the night. But because he was wealthy, respected, and gave generously to the temple, the elders listened. The woman protested, she begged, she swore innocence, but in the end she was cast out. Not stoned, Rome was watching too closely at the time, but exiled. Forced to live with her cousin near the Dead Sea, where no one would see her disgrace. That's the kind of loophole the religious elite walk through all the time. Can't kill her? Fine. Just erase her. Or better yet, make her disappearance look voluntary. Meanwhile, Roman officials, watching this from their balconies, just shake their heads and sip watered wine. Unless the people riot or stop paying taxes, they're not going to intervene. Morality isn't profitable. Obedience is. This split, the civil law versus the spiritual law, is one of the things scholars still wrestle with. Did Roman rule actually diminish executions for moral failings, or did it just push them into the shadows? Some historians argue that Rome's need for public order indirectly saved lives. Others believe that all it did was change how people were punished, shifting from execution to exile, from stones to silence. Either way, you feel it, walking through the city. There's a kind of dual consciousness here. People know what the empire permits. They also know what the Torah demands. And when those two things collide, someone usually gets hurt, or shamed, or buried. You head toward the temple now, the great limestone walls rising like a white mountain in the distance. It's the center of everything here. Spiritually, politically, socially. Every law, every custom, every fear and desire circles this place like gravity. And inside, the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of priests and scholars. They don't wear armor, but they carry the deadliest power of all. Judgment. This isn't just about law, it's about control. Who gets to define sin? Who decides what's forgivable and what isn't? And who enforces the punishment quietly, brutally, or both? By now, you're sweating. Not just from the heat, but from the realization that sex here isn't intimate, it's political, dangerous, and always watched. You pass a girl your age, eyes down, veil wrapped tight, hands clasped. She avoids your gaze, Maybe she's in love, maybe she's afraid, maybe both. She walks quickly, head high, like she's trying not to exist. In this world, survival isn't just about staying silent, it's about knowing which law can kill you faster. The temple rises before you now, immense and blinding in the midday sun, a layered marvel of stone and sanctity. Even from the outer courtyards it's clear, this is no ordinary building. This is the heart of Jewish life in 30 AD. And within these walls everything is intensified. The rituals, the expectations, and especially the moral codes that govern behaviour. If the Roman Empire rules with politics and soldiers, the temple rules with ritual and shame. And when it comes to sex, that power is absolute. As you approach the entrance to the Court of the Women, you pass vendors selling birds for sacrifice, their wings flapping and their cries sharp. Pilgrims murmur prayers as they climb the steps, pressing cloths to their foreheads. The smell here is strange, cinnamon, incense and blood, the scent of religion. It's holy, yes, but it's also deeply human, flawed, fraught. Inside, everything is about purity. There are specific places for men and women, specific rules about who can go where. The priestly class, the Kohanim, are gatekeepers not just to the Holy of Holies, but to what it means to be acceptable in the eyes of God. And in this space your body is not your own. It belongs to the law, to your family, to your community, and to an invisible moral ledger that tracks every mistake. You spot a young woman on the steps to the mikveh, the ritual bath used for purification. She's barefoot, robe slipping off one shoulder, eyes distant. She's about to immerse herself because someone, possibly herself, declared her unclean. Maybe it was her period, maybe she touched a corpse, or maybe it was sex. Either way, she has to submerge. Without it, she can't re-enter society, can't touch food, can't worship. She's not even supposed to sit in a chair someone else will use. Here, sexual activity, even consensual, even within marriage, renders both parties temporarily impure. They aren't sinful, not exactly, but they're still marked, tainted, until the right prayers are said and the right rituals performed. It's not about guilt, it's about status, about visibility. Now picture how that system feels when it's twisted against you. Say a woman's caught in an illicit affair. She's not just unclean, she's defiled. The difference: one can be washed away in a bath, the other becomes your permanent identity. The worst part: sometimes the community doesn't even need proof. Just suspicion, just a whisper. She was seen alone with him. Her veil slipped in public. They were gone too long. That's enough to start the process. A visit from elders, a demand for an explanation, a quiet meeting behind the home, and soon a family decision. Punish her privately, or bring her before the priests. In rare, extreme cases, a woman accused of adultery might face the sota ritual. You've probably never heard of it, and honestly be grateful. It's a deeply uncomfortable process. The woman is brought to the temple, her hair is uncovered, a public disgrace, and she's forced to drink a bitter concoction of water and dust from the temple floor, mixed with ink scraped from a written curse. If her stomach swells and she falls ill, that's seen as divine proof of guilt. If she doesn't, she's innocent. But not really. Her reputation's still in pieces. Historians still debate how often this ritual actually occurred. Some say it was rare, even symbolic. Others argue it was used as a scare tactic, a way to keep women in check without ever needing to go that far. Either way, the message is clear. Your body's a canvas and the temple is holding the paintbrush. But here's the real kicker. While women are being paraded, judged and purified, the men who break the same laws often slip by unnoticed, or worse, forgiven. A man can offer a guilt sacrifice, a ram, a dove, and walk away cleansed. A woman? Her sin is not just between her and God, it's between her and every neighbour, every relative, every gossipy widow who spends her afternoons weaving linen in the courtyard. You hear a priest's voice rise in a sermon. He's quoting Leviticus, warning of whoredom and abomination, calling the people to holiness. The crowd murmurs agreement, but you catch a few sceptical faces in the back. Traders from Galilee, maybe, who've seen how differently morality plays out away from Jerusalem's towering walls. The further you get from the temple, the looser the rules become, but here, you're under a microscope. Take this little-known fringe fact. Some priests actually kept records of suspicious women. lists written not in public books but passed quietly among temple authorities. These lists weren't legally binding, but they carried weight. A name on there meant a cancelled marriage, a ruined betrothal, a future of isolation. Some historians believe these lists were also used for blackmail. You can't prove it, but you can't unhear the rumours either. And what about the women themselves? How do they live knowing any misstep could lead to disgrace? The answer is cautiously, always watching, always calculating. Many teenage girls were married off by 13 or 14, in part to protect their reputation before it had a chance to be questioned. It wasn't about love, it was about transferring responsibility. Once married, the husband owned the burden of proof. If she strayed, it was his dishonour too. Even the act of going to the temple became political. Too many visits to the mikveh? People start to ask why. Not enough visits? Are you hiding something? Seen alone? Suspicious? Seen with a child too soon after marriage? Scandalous. It's exhausting. It's cruel. And it's your life. You circle the temple court, careful not to cross the invisible lines that mark where women can and can't go. A Roman soldier stands at one entrance, yawning, clearly bored with the day's sermons. He doesn't care who's pure or unclean. He only steps in when things turn violent, and sometimes they do. You overhear a conversation between two older women near the temple steps. They're talking about a girl who was taken last week. Her father wouldn't wait for the elders, one whispers. Took her out by the olive press himself. You don't ask what happened next. You already know. That's the brutal twist to this world. Even the temple, with all its laws and incense and holy rituals, can't always protect you. Sometimes it's the very place where punishments begin. Sometimes the ones who wear the robes are the first to cast stones, literally or figuratively. And yet, people keep coming. Because they have to. Because without ritual, they lose their place in society. Without sacrifices, they lose hope. Without the temple, there's only fear. So they walk the fine line, day after day, hoping that they won't be noticed, that their secrets stay hidden, that their sins, real or imagined, won't cost them everything. You take one last look at the temple, its massive gates gleaming in the light, and you realise something unsettling. In 30 AD, holiness is often just another word for control, and control is everything. You leave the temple behind and step back into the crowded streets, where the sacred bleeds into the everyday. Goats tied to stair rails, children laughing near water jugs, and market stalls cluttered with lentils, honeycombs, and the sharp scent of drying fish. But even out here, far from the blinding white stones of the holy place, the rules follow you. They cling to people like a second skin, stitched into every glance and every step. And some of the most confusing and frankly exhausting rules are the purity laws. These aren't just social guidelines. They're divine directives, deeply embedded in daily life, especially when it comes to sex. You hear them referred to constantly. Tahor for pure, tamei for impure. These labels don't mean good and bad, not exactly. A woman having her period isn't sinning, but she's considered unclean. A man who touches her, also unclean. A couple who has sex, even within marriage, are both impure for a day. It's not punishment, they say. It's just the system. But you can't help feeling how sharp the edges are. These laws wrap around everyone like invisible barbed wire, and if you're not careful, they cut deep. You pass a household where a girl, maybe 16, is scrubbing linen in a stone basin. Her hands are raw, her eyes distant. She's preparing for immersion, you hear someone say. She's just finished her niddah, the 7-day separation after menstruation. During that time, she couldn't be touched by her husband, couldn't prepare his meals, couldn't lie in the same bed. She's clean now, or soon will be. And once she's gone to the mikveh, she's fit again. The separation is strict. Some households even mark it physically. 2 beds instead of 1, separate dishes, designated seating areas. The community reinforces it too. Everyone knows. And because everyone knows, you always have to perform. There's no room for uncertainty. If a woman breaks this cycle, intentionally or not, she could be accused of violating God's law. And if she's married to a particularly devout man, he might publicly shame her for it. Or worse, divorce her with nothing. This system is especially rough for newly married couples. Imagine being 15, married to a stranger, terrified to speak up and constantly afraid of doing something impure. One mistake, one miscalculated date on your cycle, and you're being hauled before elders, and no one asks what the husband did. His body is rarely policed, his purity assumed, but yours under constant surveillance. Now add this fun little fringe detail. If you're too pure, if you go to the mikveh too often, if you avoid your husband for too many nights, you might be labelled suspicious. Some women were accused of using the laws as an excuse to avoid sex, which could be grounds for punishment or divorce. That's the double bind. Follow the rules too much, and you're cold. Not enough, and you're sinful. Some women found clever workarounds. Whisper networks existed. Quiet, candlelit circles where older women shared tricks. How to time things so you could rest without suspicion. How to fake signs of impurity when your body wouldn't cooperate. It wasn't rebellion, it was survival. You had to navigate a world that didn't just punish sin, it punished discomfort, fatigue, even disinterest. Scholars today still argue about how much of this was enforced with actual violence. Were these purity laws strictly personal, or were they publicly policed? The answer's murky. Some rabbinic texts suggest a surprisingly flexible interpretation in private homes, but then you see records, later from the Mishnah and Talmud, where women are fined, whipped, or expelled for impurity violations. It's likely the truth fell somewhere in the middle. Some households ruled with fear, others with quiet tolerance, but everyone was watching. It's not just about women either. Certain men were considered impure too, especially those who had nocturnal emissions. Yes, even dreams could make you ritually unclean. A man who woke with evidence on his garment had to bathe before entering sacred space. If he didn't, he could be turned away, reported, or worse, spiritually condemned. Again, no sin, just uncleanness. But in a society like this, the line between unfit and evil blurs fast. You walk through a quieter alley now, where small homes lean into each other, their walls sweating limestone and thyme. In one courtyard, a young mother nurses a child. She's just returned from her postnatal purification, 40 days after birth, 80 if the baby had been a girl, that's right. Giving birth to a daughter made a woman unclean for twice as long. Why? No one explains. It just is. And even if no one says it outright, you get the message. Sons are sacred, daughters are not. There's a ritual for everything. Sex, bleeding, birth, even miscarriage. If a woman miscarries, she's still impure, sometimes even more so. And if she doesn't announce it, she can be accused of hiding sin. You start to see the full shape of this society. Not a place of quiet devotion, but of relentless performance. You're always proving something. Your innocence, your obedience, your purity. There's even a special case, almost too bizarre to believe, of a family in Jericho who began burning their daughter's bedding each month. Why? Because they were convinced her menstrual impurity could curse the household. They thought her blood brought spiritual illness. Some say it was a superstition. Others claim it was a fringe interpretation of temple texts. Either way, she lived her entire adolescence with her own room burned down once a month. A living warning. It's tempting to view this all as cruelty, and in many ways it is. But it's also deeply rooted in fear of divine judgment, of plagues, of barrenness, of exile. Purity laws weren't just about sex, they were about survival. To be unclean was to risk spiritual disaster for your entire family. And so the rituals kept coming. Lavender oil, olive soap, prayers whispered in the dark, and countless walks to the mikveh under judgmental eyes. You pause near a well and listen to the rhythm of a woman drawing water. Her arms strain with the rope. Her face is hard to read. Tired, calm, maybe both. You wonder what her week has been. Has she been separated from her husband, avoiding her neighbours, trying to calculate when she's next due to bathe? This is daily life in 30 AD, not a footnote, not a ritual relic. It's survival, and the margin for error is slim. And just when you think you've seen the full picture, you remember this. Any violation, even accidental, doesn't just affect you. It affects your husband, your household, and your community's standing with God. That's the terrifying beauty of the system. Everyone has a stake in your purity, and so everyone watches. You feel it in your skin. Not the heat anymore, but the tension, like a drum stretched too tight. You haven't broken any laws, but already you feel guilty. Dirty even. Just for being here. Just for thinking too long about what no one dares to say out loud. In a world like this, purity isn't about holiness, it's about power, and your body is the battlefield. You hear her before you see her, the sharp slap of sandals against stone, the hurried swish of linen robes brushing together. Then she rounds the corner, a teenage girl no older than 14, cheeks flushed and eyes wide with panic. Behind her, 2 older women follow at a distance, whispering rapidly, one clutching a folded shawl like it's a rope she's forgotten how to throw. You step aside instinctively, watching as the girl disappears into the shadows of a doorway, vanishing like a ripple into a still pond. The women don't follow. They just wait, arms crossed, eyes fixed, as if by sheer force of judgment they can pull her back out. You've just seen a moment that happens every day here, though no one dares speak about it plainly. It's the surveillance of young women, the constant, exhausting vigilance that begins at puberty and doesn't end until marriage. If you're a girl in 30 AD Judea, your value is your virginity, not your intelligence, your humour, your kindness, or even your piety. Just that one trait, that fragile status, invisible yet somehow everyone's business. From the moment a girl begins to show signs of womanhood, she's no longer a child, she's an asset, something to protect, to guard, and eventually to trade. There's no dating, no privacy, no real freedom. You walk with your head down, your eyes lowered. If you're seen laughing too freely, speaking too loudly, or, God forbid, spotted alone with a man who isn't your father or brother, you're in danger. Not just of gossip, but of losing everything. You pass a group of girls sitting on a low wall, sewing and hushed. Their mothers stand, nearby, all half involved in the conversation, but mostly listening. The girls aren't being chaperoned out of affection. They're being monitored. It's not an accusation exactly, more like insurance. A girl left alone for too long is a question mark, and question marks get erased. If a girl is accused of having lost her virginity before marriage, even if it's false, even if she was assaulted, even if the accusation is a neighbour's petty revenge, her prospects collapse. No one will marry her. Her dowry becomes worthless. Her family, especially her father, is shamed. The entire household could lose status, trade connections, or even housing, if the scandal is loud enough. Here's where it gets worse. There are tests. Not modern medical tests, but brutal, humiliating rituals. On the wedding night, a white cloth is placed beneath the couple. The family, or the midwife, or in some cases the groom's mother, inspects it the next morning for blood. No stain, no proof, then she's not a virgin. And if she can't prove otherwise, in some towns, that's a death sentence. Literally. The groom can return her to her father's house with a formal accusation. The elders may demand a public trial, witnesses, a procession, stones. Now that's not the only outcome. Sometimes the accusation fizzles out, if the girl's family is rich, or the groom backs down. Sometimes the couple is forced to stay together regardless, stewing in bitterness for the rest of their lives. And sometimes the girl is quietly sent away to live with an aunt in another town, so no one has to face the embarrassment. But in every version, her life is over. A fringe story floats through the city this year, passed from woman to woman like a cautionary tale. A bride in Jericho accused of impurity on her wedding night. No witnesses, no proof, but her mother-in-law had political sway. The girl was dragged into the street, her face uncovered, already a disgrace, and a crowd gathered. A few shouted, a few begged for mercy. One man, a scribe, reportedly tried to intervene, but she was stoned before sundown. Her name never recorded. Her dowry? Seized by the groom's family as restitution. And here's the rub. She might have been innocent. Virginity, after all, isn't something you can reliably prove with blood. Every woman's body is different. Some bleed, some don't. Some show signs of trauma, some don't. Scholars today point out the absurdity of these tests, but in 30 AD, biology bends to belief, and belief is dangerous. You spot a young girl now, barely 10, walking beside her mother with a basket of figs. She's still safe, for now. But you can already see the watchfulness in her mother's eyes, the way she pulls the girl close when a group of young men walks by, the way she glances at the fabric of the girl's robe, making sure it hasn't shifted to show too much of her shoulders. Everything is a calculation. There's also the dowry to consider: money, land, livestock, or cloth, paid to the groom's family to secure the marriage. A virgin bride fetches a higher dowry. A non-virgin, If she's accepted at all, it's usually as a second or third wife, often older, sometimes widowed, and with far less value. Virginity has a literal price tag, and that price gets passed around in ledgers and rumours like livestock weight or olive harvests. Some girls try to find escape routes, marriage to a much older man, maybe a cousin or widower if it offers protection. Others take religious vows, committing themselves to temple service or strict chastity. But these paths are narrow and fraught. If you stray too far from what's expected, you risk being labelled deviant. Or worse, you become invisible, no longer considered worthy of marriage or motherhood. And in this world, that's almost the same as death. There's a famous legal debate still discussed by scholars today, captured in early rabbinic texts. It centres on what constitutes evidence of virginity. Some argue that if a woman's family has a good reputation, that should be enough. Others insist on physical proof, sheets, blood, even testimony from servants. It's a chilling reminder that the female body was considered not just personal property, but public record. A canvas others could write on, inspect, and judge. You pass a wall plastered with notices, wedding announcements, livestock sales, temple service schedules. One sheet flutters in the breeze, a marriage proclamation signed by the father, the bride's age, 12, the groom's, 36. No one blinks at the math. Because in this society, girls don't marry for love. They marry for safety, for alignment, for survival. And so you keep walking through this narrow maze of fear and performance, where every smile is calculated, every gaze measured, where even a conversation can be scandalous. In a world like this, you don't get to be a girl. Not really. You go straight from daughter to wife to mother, each stage dictated, defined, and monitored by someone else. The girl you saw earlier never comes back out. The women eventually leave, whispering to each other, shaking their heads. Maybe they'll return. Maybe she'll be disciplined privately, or maybe she'll disappear. Because here, in the year 30 AD, reputation is everything. And once it's gone, so are you. You're beginning to realise that love, in the way you understand it, fluttering glances, late-night talks, kisses under the stars, doesn't really exist here. At least not openly. Not between people who are supposed to get married. In the year 30 AD, marriage isn't a romantic endeavour. It's a transaction, a negotiation, a practical alliance of property, lineage and reputation. You don't marry the person who makes you laugh. You marry the one your father chooses, the one who makes sense. Right now, somewhere in a dusty courtyard or under the shade of a pomegranate tree, someone's betrothing their daughter to a man she barely knows. The girl's age could be 13, maybe younger. The man, 25, 35, sometimes older. And while you might be cringing, no one else is. This is normal. It's expected. A good match means everything. A bad one, that could curse a family's fortune for generations. The process goes like this. The father of the bride and the father of the groom meet, often through a go-between. They discuss dowry, honour, family history, and whether either side has ever been near scandal. If everything lines up, a betrothal is arranged, a legally binding contract called a ketubah. It's not a promise, it's a deal. And once it's made, breaking it is almost as shameful as breaking the marriage itself. The betrothal lasts about a year. During that time, the bride remains in her father's house, and the groom prepares a home for her. They're not supposed to be alone together. No touching, no flirting, definitely no sex. But even with those rules, plenty of rumours still float through the streets about young couples sneaking off. Some true, most exaggerated. If they're caught or even accused, it can unravel everything. The contract is voided. The dowry is lost. The girl again bears the weight. You walk past a celebration now, a modest one with flutes and laughter echoing through a side alley. A marriage feast, most likely. Tables are set out in the open, covered with bread, olives, wine, and dried dates. The guests recline on woven mats, tossing scraps to the dogs and gossiping freely. At the centre of it all is the newly married couple, looking mostly awkward. The groom is beaming, full of wine and pride. The bride, she's sitting quietly beside him, eyes cast downward, smile half-formed. She may be happy, or terrified, or both. You can't tell. If she's lucky, he's kind. If not, well, she has no legal way out. There are no grounds for divorce from a wife's side. Not for cruelty, not for neglect, not even for infidelity. A man, though, He can send his wife away with a written decree. Just say the word, really, and it's done. No questions asked. So long as he returns her dowry, sometimes, he's free. She, meanwhile, is marked forever. A divorced woman isn't a death sentence, but it's close. Remarriage is possible, sure, but rare, especially if she's suspected of being difficult. This kind of imbalance bleeds into every aspect of married life. A woman's role is set in stone. Keep the house, raise children, obey your husband. She doesn't inherit property. She doesn't decide where they live. She doesn't manage finances unless she's a widow. Her value lies in her fertility and her modesty, and if she fails at either, her worth plummets. There's an open, scholarly debate about how much say women really had in their marriages. Some sources suggest a daughter could refuse a match during the betrothal phase, especially if her father died before the ceremony. Others argue that even that was rare and mostly symbolic. The majority of historians agree. While exceptions existed, they weren't the norm. In most cases, consent wasn't a conversation. It was assumed or ignored. You walk on past a house where a woman is being carried on a litter. Her robe is dyed bright red, her wrists wrapped in fine silver chains. You think it might be a parade for a high-status bride. She's being taken to her husband's home. No fanfare, just a quiet procession of relatives and servants. This is her new life. No more nights in her parents' courtyard. No more walks with cousins. She's leaving everything she knows for a stranger's bed. Fringe fact. In some communities, a bride was even expected to prove her obedience on the first night by washing her husband's feet. Not metaphorically, literally. It was a ritual of humility, reinforcing the dynamic that would shape the rest of their marriage. There's a version of this where the groom also washes her feet back as a gesture of tenderness. But those stories are usually told in richer households, where love and luxury occasionally intersect. And yes, there are exceptions. Some couples do fall in love. Sometimes a boy and a girl grow up knowing each other, arranged from a young age, and their affection blooms alongside their obligations. But those stories are the exception, not the rule. And even then, love isn't what keeps a marriage afloat. It's children. A barren wife is a failed wife, no matter how kind she is, no matter how beautiful. If she can't produce a son within a few years, the husband is pressured to take a second wife or divorce her altogether. You pass a small home now with its door marked in red chalk. Some believe it's a blessing for fertility. Others say it means the woman inside has just given birth. Either way, the house is quiet. Maybe too quiet. You hope the baby survived. In this era, child mortality is brutal. 1 in 3 children won't live past 5. Every birth is a risk, and every wife knows her survival depends on producing not just a child, but a male heir. That's the calculation behind every marriage. Security, lineage, property. A union of families, not hearts. And once you're married, there's no more hiding. If you're unhappy, too bad. If your husband is cruel, too bad. If he cheats, too bad. You're still expected to serve him, obey him, and satisfy him. If you don't, you could be cast aside, or accused of withholding affection. That's considered grounds for divorce, or worse, suspicion of infidelity. You stop in front of a house where 2 women are hanging laundry. One is older, wrinkled by sun and years. The other is barely in her teens. They speak softly, folding robes with slow, practiced hands. Maybe mother and daughter-in-law, maybe not. But you can hear the weight in their voices. There's love there, worry, warnings. You wonder what kind of marriage the girl has been given. Whether she cried on her wedding night, whether she still does. Whether her husband sees her as a partner, or just an obligation fulfilled. Because in 30 AD, love isn't expected. It's a luxury, and most people here can't afford it. It begins with a scream. Not a long one, just a short, sharp burst, cut off halfway like someone tried to swallow it before it could get out. You're in a narrow alley near the outskirts of the town, close enough to hear the chatter of the market, but far enough away that this corner feels forgotten. The kind of place where walls lean inward like they're trying to hide something, and right now they are. A crowd is gathering, slowly but purposefully. You can feel it building. There's a gravity to these moments, a dark momentum that pulls people in. Nobody asks what happened. They already know. A woman has been caught in adultery. No one has used that word yet, not out loud. But it hangs in the air like wood smoke. The neighbours are whispering, eyes darting toward a house with its door flung wide open. Inside, you can just make out a young woman, barely into her 20s, kneeling on the floor, hair unbound, robe torn at one shoulder. Her face is a wreck of tears and fury, and standing above her is her husband, breathing hard, one hand clenched into a fist, the other pointing toward the open door like it might bite him. There's no sign of the man she's accused of sleeping with. He's vanished. Maybe he was never here, maybe she was alone, or maybe she was assaulted. It doesn't matter, because right now, the law isn't about evidence, it's about honour. And once honour is questioned, logic evaporates. In the year 30 AD, adultery is more than just a betrayal of marriage. It's a rupture in the moral fabric. It's sin wrapped in scandal, dipped in shame, and sharpened into a weapon. And it is, without exaggeration, a capital crime. The Torah is explicit. If a married woman is caught with a man who is not her husband, and there are witnesses, both are to be executed. No nuance, no appeals. This isn't metaphor. This is stoning. Death by jagged rock. A community punishment. Everyone joins in, everyone becomes judge, jury, and executioner. And if you're wondering how often this actually happened, well, that's where the debate begins. Some scholars argue it was rare, that the need for multiple eyewitnesses made it nearly impossible to convict. Others believe that in smaller villages or during religious revivals, the rules were interpreted more liberally. What counts as a witness? A neighbour who saw her robe dishevelled? A servant who heard footsteps? A husband with a grudge? You step closer to the scene. The husband has left the house now, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. A few men gather around him, murmuring, encouraging. One says something about going to the elders. Another spits on the ground and mutters a prayer of lament. The crowd, now growing, is watching both him and her. You can feel it in their eyes. They've already decided. There's a deep cruelty in this moment, and you don't need a historian to explain it to you. It's right there in the imbalance. Because if this woman had accused her husband of the same thing, no one would be gathering, no one would scream. Maybe he'd pay a fine. Maybe. More likely he'd offer a sacrifice at the temple and get on with his life. That's the game. A woman's body is her husband's property. If another man uses it, it's a theft, a defilement. But if a man sleeps with another woman, especially a single one or a servant, it's considered indiscretion, not destruction. It might raise eyebrows, it might be frowned upon, but it won't get him stoned in the street. The punishment itself, stoning, is designed not just to kill, but to humiliate. It's communal. The whole town watches, sometimes participates. There are protocols in religious texts about how to do it properly. The person must be thrown down from a height. If they survive the fall, then stones are used. Large ones, heavy. The first to throw is supposed to be the primary witness. Then the crowd joins in. But it's rarely that clean. Rage takes over. People throw before the signal. Some bring stones too small, not enough to kill, just enough to maim. Others shout curses between throws. The point isn't just death, it's erasure. A public obliteration meant to cleanse the community. Fringe fact. In a few records from later rabbinic texts, it's noted that some judges preferred other methods of execution, strangulation or burning, for adultery, arguing that stoning was too chaotic, too dependent on mob behaviour. But in the year 30 AD, in the provinces, in towns like this, stoning is still the method of choice, because it's visible, loud, memorable, a deterrent. You feel the fear crackling around you now. It's not just coming from the accused woman, it's rippling through the other women in the crowd. Mothers clutch their daughters' arms tighter. Wives lean into their husbands, eyes scanning for disapproval. Every woman here knows this could be them, and all it takes is suspicion. A late return from the market, a whispered lie, one man's pride. And what if she's innocent? What if this is revenge? What if she was assaulted and couldn't say no? That doesn't matter here. Consent is a modern lens. In 30 AD, the shame falls entirely on the woman. The burden of proof, the burden of innocence, the burden of silence. You step back, not wanting to see what might happen next. Maybe the elders will arrive and order an investigation. Maybe she'll be exiled instead. Maybe her father will beg for mercy, offer double dowry to the husband. anything to avoid bloodshed. Or maybe it'll go the other way. Maybe the crowd's already made its choice and the stones are being gathered just out of sight. You think again of how a single moment, one mistake, one rumour can unravel a life. The rules are clear, but the people who interpret them are not. And when they apply those rules, they don't do it gently. Sex here is dangerous, not because it's sinful, but because it's political, social, explosive, and the people who pay the price aren't the ones with power. They're the ones who can't afford a second robe, who can't run fast enough, who can't shout loud enough to be heard over the stones. As you leave the alley, the crowd begins to move, quietly but with purpose. Whether for punishment or prevention, you don't know, but you feel the message as clearly as if it were carved in stone. Don't be seen, don't be touched, don't be noticed. Because in 30 AD, if you are, you might not survive it. You wake up the next morning with the sun already streaming through the wooden slats of a window. It's hot, too hot for how early it is, and the air feels thick like it's holding its breath. You stretch and sit up, trying to shake off the leftover dread from yesterday's scene in the alley. You didn't sleep well, how could you? Once you've seen someone accused of adultery, even if you don't know how it ended, it stays with you. It carves something into your chest. Not fear exactly. Something heavier. Awareness. Today you find yourself drawn to the part of town where legal matters are handled. Not by Rome, but by the local elders and religious judges. There's no official courthouse, no stone steps with wide columns and wax seals, just a shaded area beneath a large fig tree, with 3 or 4 benches made of cracked wood, and a few older men sitting with scrolls across their laps. This is where justice is done, or what passes for it. A new case is being heard. Another woman, older this time, maybe in her 30s, is accused of adultery. But this one's different. She's not caught in the act. There's no eyewitness. The husband claims she was seen behaving improperly at the well. She lingered too long with a man. She smiled. She touched his hand while handing him a jar. That's it. That's the evidence. You'd expect the judges to laugh this off, to wave a hand and tell him to go home. But they don't. They nod seriously. They take it down in writing. One even strokes his beard and mutters something about the behaviour of modern women. You can feel the shift in the air. This isn't about facts. It's about performance, about appearances, about whether this woman looks guilty. They ask her questions. Was she alone? Why was she at the well at that hour? Has she spoken to this man before? She answers carefully, voice low. She glances toward the ground, then up at the men. Just enough to appear respectful, not so much to seem bold. This is a balancing act. One wrong tone, and she could be condemned for defiance. Her father sits nearby, red-faced, lips pressed together in a hard line. He's not looking at her, not once. That tells you everything. If he believed she was innocent, he'd be shouting. If he thought she was guilty, he'd be gone. But now, he's embarrassed. Caught between 2 equally shameful options. Support her and risk being accused of raising a dishonourable daughter, or condemn her and maintain the family's standing. Eventually the ruling comes down. Not stoning, not exile, just a warning. She'll be confined to her home for a month. No visitors, no public appearances. Her name will be whispered for a while. Her story passed around over lentils and flatbread. But she'll live. That is, if her husband doesn't take further action. Because under Jewish law, a husband who believes his wife is impure can divorce her without public trial. He doesn't need permission. He just needs conviction. And the judges won't stop him. You watch the woman as she stands to leave. Her steps are slow. She doesn't argue. She doesn't cry. She just disappears into the heat like a ghost. That's the quiet alternative to stoning. Social death. One day you're drawing water. The next you're a cautionary tale. Now here's where things get even darker. If you're a woman and you want to fight the accusation, you have very few tools. One of them is public testimony, if you can find someone to vouch for you. A servant, a family member, even a neighbour. But those witnesses can be bribed, threatened, or ignored. Your other option is to invoke divine judgment, like the Sota ritual. But again, that requires access to the temple, a priest willing to listen, and a community willing to wait. And if you survive the ordeal, people may still assume you cheated the system. Some scholars believe the system was built to discourage actual punishment, that the elaborate requirements for a conviction, witnesses, timing, procedure, were there to prevent impulsive violence. But even if that's true, it doesn't stop the threat of it. When the law itself becomes theatre, you don't need a gavel, you just need an audience. There's a bizarre little fringe tale that circulates around the outer villages, a woman falsely accused by her husband, who took her to the elders and swore he had proof. But when they questioned him, he panicked, fumbled his story, and it unravelled. The judges ordered him to be flogged for slander. The woman returned home, her honour intact. But her family moved away within a year anyway. Why? Because even vindication doesn't erase suspicion. In a society built on reputation, facts are flimsy. Gossip is gospel. You move on from the fig tree court, but the weight of it sticks to you. You think of all the women who've stood there, all the stories erased before they were even told, all the crimes that weren't crimes until someone decided they were. What's truly chilling is how normalised it is. No one questions the imbalance. No one says, this is insane. It's just part of life. Like sunburn or taxes or sheep bleating in the distance. Women are expected to obey, to submit, to be invisible until they're needed. And when they step out of line, real or imagined, the whole system kicks in to drag them back down. You see it even in the language people use. The word for a guilty woman is zana, literally to stray. It implies intent, movement, agency. But the words for a man's infidelity, much softer, less moral, more indulgent, like a lapse in diet, a cheat day. That's not accidental, that's design. Back in the marketplace you spot two girls no older than 12 huddled near a stall giggling. One whispers to the other, eyes flicking toward a boy across the street. For a moment it's innocent, just kids being kids. But then an older woman catches sight of them and marches over. Her voice is low but sharp. One of the girls wilts instantly, the other freezes. You hear the word modesty hissed like a curse. Then they're gone, sent home with warnings that will echo for weeks. And all this, every glance, every punishment, every stone lifted in threat, is rooted in the same thing: control. Not over sex, really, but over agency. Over who gets to want, to choose, to act, and who doesn't. Because here's the truth. Sex in 30 AD isn't private. It's not even personal. It's legal, social, and deadly serious. And when it's wielded as a weapon, it doesn't just wound, it erases. You're in a different part of the city now, where the walls lean lower, the colours run brighter, and the rules bend more easily in the shadows. The air is still dry, but it carries a different scent here. Spiced wine, crushed flowers, something musky and sweet that clings to your throat. This is the district everyone knows about but pretends not to. If the rest of Jerusalem is rigid with law and scripture, this neighbourhood is made of whispers, the kind that slide between buildings like smoke and vanish before sunrise. This is where the sex workers live. They go by many names: harlots, temple girls, perfumed ones, daughters of the night. And the truth is, not all of them are prostitutes. Some are dancers. Some are widows surviving however they can. Some are owned by brothel keepers. Others work independently, arranging appointments through coded phrases and regular clients. But no matter their title, they all wear the same label in society: shameful, and yet, strangely, necessary. You see her before she sees you. A woman leaning in a doorway, ankle exposed, veil loose, gold bangles on her wrist catching the sun like a wink. She's not hiding. She doesn't have to. The men who pass her glance briefly, then keep walking. Some look longer than they should. One even smiles and nods, the kind of nod that says, maybe later. She says nothing, she just waits. Here's the contradiction, and it's a big one. While public morality screams about purity, the quiet economy of sex is thriving, especially here, on the edge of decency. Men who uphold the law by day, priests, scribes, merchants, come here after sunset. They cover their heads, walk quickly, make excuses if caught. I was delivering wine, they'll say, or she's my cousin's servant. But everyone knows, they always know. This double standard isn't accidental. It's built into the bones of the culture. A woman who has sex outside of marriage, sinful, unclean, possibly doomed. A man who visits a prostitute, foolish maybe, but not ruined. He might even be pitied, like someone who gave in to hunger after fasting too long. There's always a way for men to be forgiven. For women, forgiveness isn't the issue. It's visibility. You slip into a small shaded courtyard where 3 women sit beside a well, laughing softly, legs tucked under colourful robes. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman with a voice like sand, tells a story about a Pharisee who tried to pay her with salt and barley. He said it was holy grain, she scoffs. I said holy doesn't keep me warm. They laugh again, not cruelly, but knowingly. There's power here, in these quiet corners. Not the kind society respects, but the kind it fears. These women know things. They know secrets. They know names. They know which priest has a mole on his hip and which elder cries afterward. They're not respected, but they're not invisible either. Some of them are former slaves, others abandoned wives. A few runaways from villages where one mistake cost them everything. What do you do when your family disowns you? When no one will marry you? When your virginity, your social currency, is gone? You come here, you learn the trade, you survive. Fringe fact: in some parts of the Roman world, including cities not far from here, brothels were legally registered. Workers paid taxes. Services were priced. But in Judea, where purity laws dominate, everything happens in secret. Technically, prostitution isn't illegal under Roman law, but under Jewish law, it's abominable. An offence that defiles both body and soul, yet no one shuts these places down. Because doing so would mean acknowledging who uses them, and no one wants to do that. You watch as a man enters the courtyard, older, robes dusty, eyes darting. The women glance up, assessing him instantly. One of them rises and walks to meet him. No words, just a nod. They vanish into a doorway. The laughter continues without pause. There's an old story circulating through these parts, told like a dirty joke but edged with truth. A high-ranking priest once visited a prostitute every week. She claimed he wept every time, not from guilt, but because he believed he was saving her soul, one visit at a time. Maybe he thought he was. Maybe she let him believe it. Either way, he kept coming. This is the complexity no one wants to name. These women are condemned in public but exploited in private. They're used, discarded, sometimes protected, but never honoured. And yet they serve a function. In a society that locks down female sexuality with rules, threats and stone walls, the pressure has to go somewhere. And here it does. Not all sex workers are treated the same, of course. Foreign women, especially Greek or Egyptian, are considered more exotic and sometimes more forgivable. Locals, especially Jewish women, are judged more harshly. If you're a native daughter who ends up here, the shame is deeper, the fall farther. You weren't supposed to become this. But there's another layer too. Some of these women are spiritual figures in their own way. In older traditions, far older than the Torah, sexual rites were once considered sacred. Vestiges of that linger. In certain fringe groups, a few still believe that union with a holy man or woman can bring visions, blessings, even fertility. It's rare and frowned upon by mainstream leaders, but it exists. Not every touch is transactional. Sometimes it's ritual, sometimes it's myth. You sit for a while in the courtyard, unnoticed. The women talk about food, prices, weather. One braids another's hair with sprigs of rosemary. It's ordinary, even peaceful. If you didn't know their profession, you'd never guess. That's what strikes you most. These aren't cautionary tales in sandals. They're just people, laughing, tired, alive. And yet, their lives hang by a thread. At any moment, one of them could be accused of seducing someone important, dragged before the elders, denied protection, beaten, exiled, even killed. And not because of what they did, but because someone powerful decided they had served their purpose. Still, they endure. They outlast shame. They repurpose it. Here, under the fig trees and in the corners of dark rooms, they reclaim pieces of themselves. One coin, one night, one whispered name at a time. When you finally leave the courtyard, you walk past the woman in the doorway again. She meets your eyes. Not flirtatiously, just steadily. Like she knows something you don't. Something the scrolls and elders and temple walls forgot. And maybe she does. There's something strange about how men walk here. Not all of them, but the ones with authority, with silver-trimmed robes or well-fed bellies or hands that haven't worked a day in years. They strut. You can almost hear the rhythm in their sandals, like their feet are used to people stepping out of their way. They move through the streets like the world was written just for them. And maybe, in some ways, it was. Especially when it comes to sex and sin. You've been watching for days now, long enough to see a pattern. Women carry the burden of purity. Girls carry the burden of modesty. But men seem to carry very little, at least not publicly. That's not to say they don't sin, they absolutely do. But when they do, the punishment is lighter, the judgment quieter, and the consequences, if they exist, are conveniently swept under the nearest rug. Today, you're in the square near the council chambers, where several men are in heated discussion. Their voices rise and fall in the way of practiced scholars, half chanting scripture while jabbing their fingers in the air. They're debating a passage about uncleanness, whether a man who lies with an unmarried woman should pay compensation or face a lashing. The opinions vary. Some say he must marry her. Others say he must pay a bride price to the father. One even suggests that if she didn't scream during the act, she might have agreed, and the man should be let off. That last line makes your stomach turn. But no one flinches. It's not just legal theory, it's lived reality. Consent is almost never considered from the woman's perspective. A man can claim misunderstanding, or even ignorance. A woman must prove innocence, and she rarely can. You listen longer. The conversation shifts, touching now on divorce law. One man recites the requirements. If a man finds something indecent in her, that's the phrase. Vague, deliberately so. Something indecent. It could mean adultery, yes, but it could also mean burning the bread, aging poorly, or being too outspoken. If she doesn't please him, he can dismiss her. With a writ of divorce and a token compensation, her life becomes ash. No home, no security, no future, just a label. One man chuckles. My uncle divorced his wife for speaking during prayer. The others laugh. Whether it's a joke or not, you can't tell. Either way, she's gone. But that's the point, isn't it? These laws, this entire culture, aren't about justice. They're about control. And control is most effective when it wears the mask of righteousness. A man can sin and call it weakness. A woman sins and becomes a lesson. There's a story circulating now about a merchant from Caesarea. Respected, wealthy, known for his donations to the temple. He's caught with a servant girl, 15, maybe 16. The details are vague, but the whispers are loud. What happens? Nothing. Not publicly. His wife moves out of their shared home, yes, but quietly. He remains on the synagogue board. His donations continue. He walks through the square head high. The girl? No one knows. She's gone. Some say she was sold. Others say she was sent away with a few coins and a gag order. A few believe she's dead, but it doesn't matter. No one asks. The narrative has already been set. He was tempted. She was tempting. The serpent in linen. Fringe fact. Certain sects of the Pharisees actually had rituals for repurifying men who had sinned sexually. Washings, fastings, sacrifices. Some even claim that 7 days of strict observance could cleanse a man's impurity completely. But for women, there was no such path back. Purity once broken stayed broken. And yet, here's what really gets you. These same men will stand in the temple tomorrow and speak about justice. They'll lift their hands and bless the crowd. They'll tell stories about righteous living and use phrases like moral decay and the sins of our daughters. The hypocrisy isn't hidden. It's paraded. You walk through the upper part of the city now, where the homes are cleaner and the servants younger. A boy about 13 carries a tray of figs through a gate. A girl, barely older, follows with a jug of wine balanced on her hip. These are the domestic workers, usually from poorer families or purchased outright as slaves. And while technically protected under the law, everyone knows what really happens behind closed doors. A wealthy man can exploit a servant and claim it was consensual. If the servant is unmarried and unbetrothed, there might be a fine. Maybe. But again, the girl's word means nothing unless she can prove coercion. And how do you prove that? Bruises fade. Fear doesn't photograph. And when she shows signs of pregnancy, the question isn't, who did this to you? But why did you seduce your master? The men. They confess at Yom Kippur, pay their dues, and are seen as humbled. The women? They're blamed forever. You step into a shaded courtyard where a few older men recline on cushions discussing interpretations of Leviticus. You catch snippets. Impurity of the loins. Defilement by night. They speak in riddles. What they're really discussing is male emission. Yes, the kind that happens during sleep or arousal. Under Jewish law, this renders a man temporarily impure. He must wash, wait until evening, and then he's clean. But there's a twist. If the emission happens with a woman, especially outside marriage, it's a worse offence, one that could incur a fine or sacrifice. Unless, of course, no one finds out. Which is why so many of these men are quietly careful. They keep certain women in separate homes. They travel to Jericho or Caesarea when they need to sin in peace. And when they return, they say nothing. Because silence protects power. It's why people still talk about that one high priest who mysteriously stepped down mid-year. No reason given, rumours swirled. A servant girl, a broken engagement, a threat of exposure. But the temple said he was called to meditate. And just like that, the scandal vanished. You stop at a well where a group of women are drawing water. One of them mentions a man in the Sanhedrin known for his lectures on virtue, but who has been seen visiting a certain house near the edge of town, always after dark. He prays louder than the rest, one of them says. The others laugh. Not bitterly, just knowingly. Because they've all seen it before. In this world, male sin is elastic. It stretches and bounces back. Female sin? It breaks. And it breaks the woman with it. You look around and wonder how many men here have sinned today already. How many glances, how many hands, how many whispered plans, and how many women will pay for it. Because in 30 AD, hypocrisy isn't the exception, it's the rule. And for men, the rules are written in pencil. The road out of town curves past olive groves and dusty fig trees, winding its way toward a village where something remarkable once happened. A moment that people still whisper about in street corners and shaded courtyards. You follow the dirt path through golden light, sandals crunching against loose pebbles, until the sounds of the city fade and a calmer stillness takes over. No temple horns here, no shouting scribes, just the occasional bleat of a goat and the rhythmic creak of a farmer's cart. This village doesn't look like much. A few stone homes with flat roofs, grapevines crawling across walls and one central well. But it's here, according to half a dozen stories, some holy, some speculative, that a young rabbi changed the law without changing the law at all. He didn't rewrite scripture, he didn't hold office, he didn't even raise his voice, he just knelt in the dirt and drew lines in the sand. You know the story, even if you've only heard the headline. A woman caught in adultery, dragged before a crowd of angry men, and a rabbi who dared to say, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." Sounds clean, cinematic. But the truth, as always, is messier. It starts with an ambush. The scribes and Pharisees had been following this teacher, this Jesus, for a while. They didn't like him. He was popular, unpredictable, and dangerously soft on sinners. So they found a woman accused of adultery, never named, never heard, and threw her at his feet in front of a crowd. They weren't just asking for his judgment, they were baiting him. Because here's the setup. If he said she should be stoned, he'd be breaking Roman law. Remember, executions had to be approved by the empire. But if he said she shouldn't be punished, he'd be ignoring Jewish law, and they could call him a heretic. It was a trap. Either he defied the temple, or he defied Caesar. He didn't do either. He knelt, he drew in the dirt, and then he said something that didn't sound like a legal opinion. It sounded like a challenge. Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. Silence. Then footsteps. Then stones dropping to the ground one by one. It's important to understand how radical that moment was. In a world where the law was weaponized, where women were punished just for being accused, this man didn't argue for leniency. He pointed out the hypocrisy. He turned the mirror around. He asked the judges to judge themselves, and they blinked. This wasn't mercy in the modern sense. Not, let her go, she's innocent. This was deeper. It was a dismantling of the ritual, a refusal to play the game. He didn't say she hadn't sinned. He didn't ask what really happened. He just reminded them that justice without humility isn't justice at all. The woman, for her part, said nothing. Not in the version that survives. She didn't plead, she didn't confess. She simply stood there waiting to die and watched the execution fizzle out around her like smoke in the wind. What happened to her afterward? No one knows. Some believe she followed Jesus. Others say she went back to her family in disgrace but untouched. There's even a fringe theory, half poetry, half theology, that she later became one of the early leaders in the underground Christian community. A preacher, a healer, a woman who understood grace more than anyone else ever could. But none of that is in the record. Her name is lost. Her story ends with survival. And maybe, in this world, that's miracle enough. You walk now along the edge of the village, imagining the crowd, the heat, the tension, a woman on her knees surrounded by men with stones in their hands, and one man, unarmed, unafraid, kneeling beside her in the dust. He could have quoted scripture. He could have reminded them of the required 2 witnesses. He could have called for Roman intervention. But he didn't. He went lower, quieter, wiser. And this wasn't the only time he challenged sexual hypocrisy. This same teacher once told a crowd of men that even looking at a woman lustfully was the same as adultery. Not legally, of course, but spiritually. Imagine that. In a world where women are stoned for being seen, and men are forgiven for anything short of murder, he said, your thoughts are part of your sin. Your gaze is not innocent. Your power is not blameless. That didn't go over well. You sit under a fig tree, eyes closed, the sun painting red shadows through your eyelids. You imagine being that woman, being her father, her sister, her husband if she had one. You imagine the terror of being accused, the sting of humiliation, the weight of all those eyes, and then the sound of stones hitting the ground. Not your body, but the earth. The difference between death and life decided in a breath. And here's what really twists your stomach. This wasn't common. This wasn't normal. What happened that day was a disruption, a rebellion, but without swords. And it enraged people, because it didn't just save one woman, it questioned the whole system. If she could be spared, what does that mean for all the others who weren't? For all the ones who were already buried? The records are silent on that. They move on to other stories, healings, sermons, crosses. But for one brief moment in a forgotten village, the machine of punishment ground to a halt. One man said, "No more. Not like this." You stand up, brushing dirt from your palms. The road back to Jerusalem stretches before you, long and pale in the heat. You don't know what awaits when you return to the city, the laws, the rituals, the watchful eyes. But you carry something with you now, not peace, not safety, just the memory of a woman who should have died, but didn't, and a man who told the truth, even when no one wanted to hear it. You return to the city with a dusting of hope still clinging to your thoughts like the trail dust on your cloak, but it doesn't last long. The moment you pass through the gates, you can feel the tension pulling at your skin again. Something's shifted while you were gone. Word travels fast in places like this, even without ink or parchment. Everyone knows what happened to the woman in the village. Some are angry, some confused, others just scared, and when fear enters the bloodstream of a society already obsessed with control, it has a way of mutating into violence. You catch the murmur of it near a bakery, where 2 women whisper behind baskets of barley loaves. "She brought shame to her house," one says. "She dishonoured her father." The other scoffs. "The teacher dishonoured the law." Their words sharpen like knives being honed on stone. They're not talking about forgiveness. They're talking about what should have happened, what still might. In this society, mercy is not just rare, it's dangerous, because it breaks the cycle. It says maybe punishment isn't the only way to enforce purity, and when that happens, the whole framework starts to crack. So what do people do when they sense the scaffolding wobbling? They build higher walls, they shout louder, they make examples, and that's what brings you to tonight's tale, one of the ugliest traditions hidden inside the folds of family life, honour killings. You won't find them written explicitly in the religious laws, not in so many words. But you'll see them lived out, quietly tolerated, sometimes even applauded. The logic is chilling. If a daughter is caught in sexual sin, real or suspected, her father, or sometimes her brother, is expected to restore the family's honour, and if that means ending her life, so be it. It starts the way it always does. A rumour. A cousin sees her speaking to a man near the vineyards. A neighbour says she was out too late. A servant girl notices blood-stained linen missing from the bridal chamber. The specifics don't matter as much as the perception. The mere suggestion of impropriety is enough to set the wheels turning. You pass a house where people are gathered outside, their voices low and grave. A father sits on the doorstep, face in his hands. The neighbours offer condolences, not for a death, but for a shame. "I'm sorry for your burden," one says. "You must do what's right," another mutters. They don't say it outright, but everyone knows. They're urging him to take action, to cleanse the stain. Inside, a young girl waits in silence. Maybe she's guilty, maybe not. It won't matter. Because what matters is how the family looks tomorrow. If they don't act, the entire household becomes untouchable. No one will marry the other daughters. No one will lend the sons silver. Invitations will stop arriving. The rot of shame spreads fast, and the only way to stop it, so they believe, is with blood. And so the father will take her outside the village, or into the hills. Maybe he'll say he's bringing her to a relative. Maybe he won't say anything at all. Sometimes it's done quickly, a single strike. Sometimes it's slower, symbolic even, a shunning, a sending away with no food, no water, a death passed off as misadventure, but everyone knows. There's a legend of a girl named Eleanor, barely 16, who was seen weeping at the well one morning. A week later, she was gone. Her family said she'd been sent to care for a sick aunt in Samaria, but her friends whispered that her father found a letter, one that mentioned a boy from Galilee, a boy who never came forward. They found her body 2 months later, buried under loose stones by a fig tree. No one was charged. Her father, still greeted with respect in the market. "He did what he had to," they said. Some scholars argue that honour killings weren't officially condoned, that they were rare or exaggerated in later accounts. But others point to patterns, laws that hint at the father's near absolute authority over his daughter, traditions that allow a family to protect its name through disciplinary action, euphemisms that sound less like justice and more like revenge. You pause by a well, the same kind of place where Eliana might have stood. A group of young women are drawing water, their laughter brittle and nervous. One of them wears a bruise beneath her eye, half hidden by her headscarf. No one asks, no one mentions it. Because to ask would imply something happened, and if something happened, someone might have to act. This is how the system protects itself, by forcing silence, by making fear contagious. You don't have to kill your daughter to control her, you just have to make sure she's seen what happens when others step out of line. The message is written not in laws but in absences, in missing girls, in mothers who stop talking, in brothers who glare just a second too long. Fringe detail. In some rural towns there were designated mourning benches for girls who had brought shame. They would sit outside their homes for days, heads covered, food brought by neighbours. It wasn't execution, but it might as well have been. A living death, a public warning. And what about the mothers? They grieve, quietly. Sometimes they resist. There are stories, precious few, of mothers who hid their daughters, who sent them away in the night, who begged the father to reconsider. But even they know the price. If he shows mercy, it's his honour that dies. And in this world, a man's honour is worth more than a girl's life. You pass a shrine on the edge of town, a simple pile of stones marked with faded cloth and a broken sandal strap. No name, no inscription. But people leave flowers there. They remember even if they can't speak. And you wonder, how many girls are buried in shallow graves outside villages like this? How many were innocent? How many were guilty only of curiosity, of love, of speaking to the wrong person at the wrong time? You look up and see the stars beginning to emerge, fragile and quiet, as if even they're afraid to shine too brightly. And you think again of the woman spared by the teacher, the stones that never flew. It was a miracle, yes, but also a rebellion, because she wasn't just saved from death, she was saved from expectation, from the ritual that says, you must die so we can live with ourselves. But that was one moment, one man, and tonight in homes all over Judea, daughters are still walking on eggshells, praying they're not next, not accused, not noticed, because in a world where honour is more important than truth, love becomes a liability, and survival, that's not about innocence, it's about silence. The night is cooler now, a breeze drifting in from the hills carrying the scent of rosemary and wood smoke. You take a slow breath. It feels easier out here, away from the city centre, the rituals, the judgment. But there's something else in the air too, an odd stillness, like the quiet just before a song starts. And it's here, in this twilight hush, that you hear whispers of a different kind of vow, not about marriage, not about punishment, but about giving everything up, including sex, including wine, including even your hair. This is the path of the Nazarite. It's not a common one. In fact, most people find it a little extreme. But for those who choose it, or are dedicated to it by their parents, the Nazarite vow is a radical act of devotion. It means separating yourself from the world, setting yourself apart for God. No grapes in any form, so no wine, no raisins, not even vinegar. No cutting your hair, no touching the dead, not even your own family. And, though it's not stated outright, many Nazarites live celibate lives. Sex, like everything else, becomes a distraction from the divine. You find one now, near a small grove of fig trees. He's sitting cross-legged, robe simple, hair long and unkempt, hanging past his shoulders like a curtain of weathered rope. He's not preaching, he's just there, quiet, focused, as if listening to something no one else can hear. He's not alone in his devotion. There are women too, though fewer, who take the Nazarite vow. You hear about them sometimes in stories. A mother dedicates her unborn child. A young widow renounces earthly pleasures. A girl, rejected in love, gives herself over to solitude. It's not a punishment, it's a calling. But in a society that values women mostly for their fertility and obedience, a woman who refuses to marry, or worse, refuses to bear children, is considered suspicious at best, cursed at worst. One tale sticks in your mind. A Nazarite woman from the hills of Galilee, Elisheva, they say her name was, vowed at 17 never to marry, never to cut her hair, and never to drink wine. People thought she'd been jilted. Others said she'd seen something terrible, a sister punished for a sin that wasn't hers. Whatever the truth, she lived in silence for decades, wandering from village to village, surviving on alms and figs. Some people revered her, others spat at her feet, and, when she died, the townsfolk argued about what to do with her body. She didn't live like one of us, they said. Should we bury her like one of us? That's the double bind of religious devotion here. Step too far from the norm, and you're no longer part of the community. Even if your actions are holy, even if you quote scripture. People might admire you, but they won't trust you, especially if you're a woman. You walk alongside the Nazarite man for a while, not speaking. There's a serenity to him that's unnerving. You wonder if he's lonely, if he ever misses the softness of touch, the taste of wine, the warmth of a lover's breath. Or maybe he's moved past all that. Maybe his hunger has been reshaped into something more abstract, less bodily, more celestial. And yet the line between devotion and delusion can be thin. There are stories of Nazarites who went mad, who wandered into the desert and never came back, who claimed to see angels or hear God's voice in the rustling of date palms. The temple authorities kept an eye on them, quietly, gently, but always with a hint of unease. Because holiness that can't be controlled makes people nervous. Fringe fact, there was one priest who famously tried to ban Nazarite vows for women, arguing that they distracted from the natural duties of marriage and motherhood. His decree didn't last, but the idea stuck. Even in spiritual rebellion, a woman is measured by how well she returns to her role. You sit beneath an olive tree now, the grass cool beneath your hands. A group of children plays nearby, rolling a carved wooden hoop between them. One of the mothers glances toward you, then back to the Nazarite, then whispers something to the woman beside her. You don't hear the words, but you know the tone. It's caution, curiosity, possibly fear. Because people like him, like Elisheva, don't fit the grid. They exist outside the economy of marriage and family and inheritance. They don't produce heirs. They don't contribute livestock. They don't host feasts. Their value isn't transactional. And in a world where most relationships are built around contracts, someone who opts out completely is both enviable and deeply unsettling. You wonder what happens when a Nazarite's vow ends. According to the tradition, they shave their head at the temple, offer sacrifices, and drink wine again. Some go back to normal life, some marry, some become teachers, others disappear. There's a tension in that too, this return to the very world they once renounced. It's like peeling off a sacred mask and stepping back into the marketplace, where everything is louder, grittier, more compromised. But for a moment, while the vow lasts, they live in a kind of clarity. Even if it's isolating, even if it's unsustainable, it's a refusal to play the game, a protest made not with fire or stones, but with silence. You look again at the Nazarite nearby. His eyes are closed. His hands are open on his knees. You don't know if he's praying or meditating or just listening to the wind, but you understand something about him now. He hasn't escaped the system. He's just chosen to face it differently. And maybe that's the only form of resistance left here. To choose another rhythm, to opt out of the endless measuring of worth by marriage, sex or bloodline. To say, I will not play by your rules, even if the price is loneliness. As the sun dips lower, you rise. The Nazarite doesn't look up, he just breathes, and you walk away, wondering if celibacy, in a world obsessed with controlling sexuality, might be the loudest rebellion of all. You're back in the city again, and tonight the streets are humming. Not with celebration, nothing so joyful, but with the rhythm of ritual. People are moving with purpose, hands full of linen, bundles of herbs, little clay jars of oil. You follow a group of women down a narrow path carved into the stone, one that dips behind the main streets and leads to something not often talked about but universally known, the mikveh, the ritual bath, the place where everything unclean is supposed to be washed away, including in some cases shame. There's no sign, no announcement, just a short stairway and the scent of damp stone. The air here is cooler, heavy with moisture, and there's a hush that falls over the group the moment you descend. This is sacred space, not in the way of temple grandeur, but in the quiet, personal way of secrets. No one speaks above a whisper. Sandals are removed, robes are loosened. The women take turns, folding their garments on a low bench, stepping into the water one by one. The mikveh isn't for bathing in the hygienic sense. It's spiritual, symbolic, a return to purity through immersion. The water must be naturally sourced, rain or spring, and deep enough to cover the entire body. There's a specific order. Descend, breathe, submerge completely, then rise. Tonight a young woman goes first. You can tell by the way she hesitates at the edge of the steps that this isn't routine. Her fingers tremble as she slips off her robe, revealing pale bruises on her arms. No one comments. No one has to. Everyone sees. She steps into the water slowly, gasping as it rises past her knees, her waist, her shoulders. Then she sinks under, vanishing completely for a heartbeat. When she surfaces, she lets out a breath like she's been holding it for a week. You realize, in this moment, that ritual and relief are not the same thing. The law says she's clean now, fit, acceptable. But you can see it in her face. Nothing has been healed. Not really. Because even if the mikveh washes away impurity, it can't erase fear. It can't make her home safe again. And it certainly can't protect her from judgment if the bruises are noticed tomorrow. Another woman enters the water, this one older, perhaps in her 40s, with a quiet strength in her posture. Her movements are practiced, almost graceful. She's probably been here dozens of times, after her cycle, after childbirth, maybe after her husband's death. She dips under with no ceremony, no prayer, just silence. When she comes back up, she brushes water from her eyes like it's nothing, like it's routine. And in a way it is. These baths are part of a life here, required after menstruation, after sex, after childbirth, after touching a corpse, after certain illnesses. In some communities, even the men visit, though far less frequently, and almost always in private. The idea is not that these things are sins, but that they make a person tamis, ritually impure. And impurity, if not dealt with, separates you from the divine, from the community, from the sacred. But over time, the line between impurity and sin blurs. If a woman forgets to go to the mikveh, or delays it, or is caught avoiding it, she's whispered about, judged, maybe even reported to the elders. It doesn't matter why she skipped. It doesn't matter if she's afraid or poor or sick. The ritual must be performed, or she's considered unfit. Not just spiritually, but socially. There's a fringe case scholars still argue about. A widow who was accused of skipping her purification after her husband's death. The community said she did it out of spite, that she was trying to shame his name. She claimed she was too weak from grief. The elders ruled against her. She was banned from temple service for a year, not exiled, but effectively erased. You watch as the last woman descends into the water. She's crying, softly but openly. Her sister holds her robe on the steps, whispering a prayer. You catch the words, "make her whole again." Maybe she's here after a miscarriage or an assault. Or maybe she's just broken by the pressure of being told, again and again, that she's never clean enough. You realise something else. Standing here barefoot on cool stone, for all its sacredness, the mikveh can also be a trap. A place where ritual replaces reality. Where the act of cleansing becomes a requirement rather than a comfort. Where women go not to find peace, but to maintain appearances. To prove they're still part of the system. Because if you stop going, if you say, "I don't care," or "I don't believe," or "this doesn't fix what was done to me," then you're out. You're no longer respectable. And in a society where reputation is everything, that's a kind of death. There's a practical side too. The mikveh is often tied to sex. A woman can't sleep with her husband until she's been purified after menstruation. So if she refuses to go, he can accuse her of withholding affection. And that can lead to divorce, or worse, suspicion of adultery. So women go. Even if they're tired, even if they're terrified, they strip, they step in, they hold their breath, and they pretend that a few seconds underwater makes them whole again. You remember a story someone told you earlier? A fringe tale, rarely repeated. A woman who entered the mikveh and never came out, not because she drowned, but because she stayed under too long, on purpose. Her body was pulled from the water, limp and quiet, her robe neatly folded on the bench. No note, no explanation, just a decision, her final ritual, her final cleansing. It's easy to call that story legend, but here it rings too true. Because when ritual becomes performance, and performance becomes survival, there are only so many roles a person can play before they break. You leave the mikveh quietly, head bowed, following the women back to the street. No one speaks. They move like shadows, like ghosts returning to houses where no one sees them anymore. And as you walk, you can't help but wonder, how many of these women were here by choice, and how many came because they were told it was the only thing standing between them and rejection? Because in 30 AD, cleanliness isn't about water, it's about obedience. And if you won't play the part, you're written out of the story. You pass back through the market just as dusk settles in like a soft blanket. Orange light bleeding across the rooftops, dust glowing in the air like gold. The voices here are winding down, quieter now, and the street smells like roasted lentils, sour wine, and something faintly sweet. Figs, maybe, or honey bread gone stale in the heat. For a moment, it almost feels like peace, but you know better by now. Underneath the slow rhythm of daily life, the watchful silence still hums, and if you listen carefully, you can hear it tightening around certain households, especially the ones near the temple walls. Tonight you're watching the men at the top, the powerful ones, the ones who enforce morality with fire and scrolls but live in glass houses that somehow never seem to shatter. They call themselves the Sanhedrin, a council of elders, priests and scholars who interpret law, oversee disputes, and maintain the sacred machinery of religious life. They're the highest legal authority in Jewish society, and when it comes to sin, especially sexual sin, their words are final. The problem is, their lives don't always match their rulings. You walk past one of their homes now. It's bigger than most. Walled garden, 2 levels, wine jars stacked in neat rows near the entrance. You've heard the rumours, same as everyone else. This particular elder, let's call him Judah, is known for his stern lectures on women's modesty, his fiery pronouncements from the synagogue steps. But it's also whispered that he keeps a woman in a neighbouring town. Not his wife, not even a second wife, just a young widow, visited in secret, kept in silence. She receives coin, gifts. Her rent is paid by someone whose name never appears in writing. And here's the real kicker. No one confronts him, because he's careful, because he's powerful, because his hands are clean on paper, and that's all that matters. This isn't an isolated case. The elite here are insulated by status. When the rules tighten around the poor, around the vulnerable, the men in the Sanhedrin enjoy a kind of moral immunity. They have scrolls, they have connections, they know how to phrase things, how to frame acts of indulgence as spiritual struggle or private repentance. Their sins are seen as slips, everyone else's, sledgehammers. You catch sight of another councilman near the olive press, robes too clean for a day's labour, hands clasped in what would look like prayer if you hadn't seen him half an hour earlier, slipping behind the bathhouse with a girl no older than his daughter. She's a servant, probably owned by someone he knows, and whatever happened behind those walls wasn't discussed, won't be discussed, unless she turns up pregnant, in which case she'll be cast out, and he'll offer a guilt sacrifice at the temple. Case closed. There's a fringe debate among scholars about whether the Sanhedrin were held to any higher moral standard, or whether their power exempted them entirely. Some argue that leaders were judged more harshly, that they were expected to embody the law in every aspect. Others suggest that, like most institutions, hypocrisy simply dressed itself in finer cloth and kept walking. You lean against a column and watch as several priests pass by, laughing too loudly for men sworn to solemnity. One of them jokes about a certain widow of Jericho, and how she knew the Psalms better lying down than standing up. The others snort into their beards. You feel your skin crawl. These are the men who sit in judgment, who quote Leviticus and hand down punishments, who look a terrified woman in the eyes and say, "The law is clear," while hiding their own misdeeds behind veils of piety. And the women? They know. They always know. There are entire subcultures of quiet resistance built around this knowledge. Servants who barter secrets for safety, wives who pretend not to see in exchange for economic security, daughters trained not just in modesty, but in silence. One story, passed down like a cautionary parable, tells of a high priest whose mistress, an unmarried woman he kept in a separate home near the city gate, became pregnant. When word began to spread, he accused her of seducing him. She was dragged before the elders, tried for harlotry, and sentenced to exile. He wept in the temple that week. His sermon was praised for its emotional depth. You think of her sometimes. No one knows her name now. No one remembers the child, but his descendants still hold seats in the council. This isn't just hypocrisy, it's institutionalized, structural. The Sanhedrin doesn't just fail to punish its own, it shields them, and they use that shield to shape society in their image. They pass rulings that tighten restrictions on women's behaviour. They add commentaries to scrolls, defining what counts as tempting. They extend fasting periods after impure thoughts, but only for the masses. Their own thoughts, desires, and deeds, cloaked in sanctity. Fringe fact: there's evidence that at least one temple scribe began compiling a list of abuses by religious leaders, misconduct, bribes, secret relationships. He was caught. His scrolls were burned. Some say he was stoned for heresy. Others say he simply vanished. You wonder how many people still keep secrets like that, scratched on wax tablets, hidden in wall niches, whispered into the ears of dying women. Because the truth isn't hard to find here. It's just hard to say out loud. You walk past the temple at twilight. The outer courts glow with torchlight. Pilgrims sing. Offerings are laid down with reverence. It all looks so pure, so structured. But you've seen what lives beneath it. You know the duality, the laws etched in stone, and the exceptions written in whispers. The commandments recited at dawn, and the violations carried out at midnight. And still, the system holds, because the Sanhedrin says it does. Because people fear chaos more than corruption. Because it's easier to believe in flawed holiness than to face the alternative. That the whole structure is built on silence, not sanctity. You stop at a fountain and splash water on your face. The heat of the day has broken, but the weight of what you've seen hasn't. And you think, not for the first time, that maybe the real sin in this society isn't desire. Maybe it's hypocrisy in a robe. You hear it before you see it. Voices raised in anger. That unmistakable tone of family drama amplified to a public spectacle. You round the corner and find a group gathered just off the main road, standing awkwardly outside a large home with carved lintels and brightly dyed awnings. People murmur as they pass, pretending not to linger while absolutely lingering. You recognise the name attached to the house, Herod, or rather one of his sons, because when it comes to Herod's descendants, there are a lot of names, a lot of titles, and a truly disturbing number of romantic entanglements. It doesn't take long to realise you've just stumbled into the edge of a very familiar mess. This isn't just a scandal. It's another chapter in the ongoing Herodian soap opera, a multi-generational saga of lust, betrayal, sibling marriages, stepmother drama, and the occasional conveniently timed execution. If you thought royal families were paragons of virtue, this clan is here to correct you, loudly and with wine. The Herods, descendants of the infamous King Herod the Great, are powerful, They've got Rome's favour, local authority and massive estates. They also have a history of sleeping with each other, literally. Herod the Great married 10 wives. One of his sons married his niece. Another tried to marry his brother's widow. One of them, Herod Antipas, left his own wife to marry Herodias, who just happened to be his half-brother's wife and his niece. Yeah, it's a lot. You can't keep track without a family tree, and even then the branches are... well, let's just say they tangle in ways that make the local rabbis grind their teeth. Right now, the shouting seems to involve Herod Antipas and a visiting emissary, likely someone sent to deliver a complaint from Jerusalem's religious authorities. The reason? His marriage to Herodias. The union is controversial, not just because she was previously married to his half-brother, but because she divorced him to marry Antipas, which is a massive no-no under Jewish law. Women don't initiate divorce here. Not without backlash, and certainly not to run off with a man who's also part of her bloodline. The religious leaders are furious. The people are divided. Rome is largely amused. And Herod throws parties, but this isn't just tabloid fodder. This is the royal family setting an example that undermines everything the temple tries to enforce. When ordinary people are being stoned or shunned for adultery, the king's family is sleeping with their siblings and serving honey cakes afterward. And because they have power, no one can stop them, at least not legally. But there are still voices of resistance. One in particular, a wild-eyed prophet named John, who's made it his personal mission to call out Herod's sin. Loudly, publicly, over and over again. You've heard the stories, how John the Baptizer stood in the Jordan River and shouted to the crowds, condemning Herod for taking his brother's wife, declaring it unlawful, immoral and unholy. He didn't whisper, he didn't hedge, he named names. And for a while Herod let it slide. Maybe he found it entertaining, maybe he enjoyed the challenge, but Herodias didn't. She saw the danger, she saw the weight of public opinion beginning to tilt, and she wanted John silenced. Fringe fact. According to later records, Herodias' daughter, Salome, performed a dance at a banquet that so captivated Herod, he promised her anything she wanted. Coached by her mother, she asked for John's head on a platter, and she got it. Just like that, the loudest voice of dissent was gone. Not because he sinned, because he exposed someone else's sin. You walk past the gate of the Herodian estate, catching a glimpse of servants bustling inside, wine being poured, musicians tuning their instruments. It's as if nothing's wrong. And maybe for them, nothing is. Herod still rules. Herodias still wears her rings. John's voice is gone, swallowed by a pit in the desert, but the people remember, they always do. Scandal clings to power like dust to sweat. And in the side streets and temple courtyards, his name is still whispered. Not with fear, with awe. Because he said what others wouldn't. He named what others hid. There's a debate among scholars even now about how much John's condemnation of Herod affected the wider movement later led by Jesus. Was John the political lightning rod that cleared space for softer teachings? Or was his death the warning shot that kept others quiet? Either way, his fate is a reminder. When you challenge sex and power, especially at the top, you don't last long. And that's what the Herods represent in the end. Unchecked power. They can sleep with whomever they want, rewrite marriage contracts, kill prophets, and still be seen as rulers. Because they serve Roman interests, because they entertain, because they are the walking embodiment of double standards. You stop by a well where 2 women are filling jugs. They're talking about Herodias, how she wears purple dye, how she rides her chariot standing up, how she dared to speak over priests at a feast. Shameless, one says. Dangerous, says the other. But neither looks angry. Not really. There's something else in their voices. Admiration. Fear. Maybe both. Because Herodias did what no one else could. She seized power in a world that said women couldn't. She broke every rule and paid for it, yes, but not with her life. Not yet. And that alone makes her terrifying. You keep walking, the city darkening around you. Somewhere, music plays from a distant courtyard. Somewhere, a girl is being told she must marry a man 3 times her age. Somewhere, another prophet is starting to raise his voice, and in the palace, Herod pours another glass of wine and kisses the niece who became his wife. Because in 30 AD, power isn't just corrupt, it's immune, and sex in the hands of the powerful becomes just another tool to keep control. The further you walk from the Temple Mount, the stranger things get. The streets curve a little more, the language shifts, the customs soften. You pass houses painted with brighter colours, murals chipped and sun-bleached but still bold, scenes of gods you don't recognise, wreaths of grapes, men reclining with women in ways that would get them exiled just a few hills over. This is the Greco-Roman Quarter, where the rules loosen like robe ties on a hot afternoon. You're still in Judea, but it doesn't feel like it anymore. And that's the point. This is a world within a world, a place where Rome isn't just the occupying power, it's a lifestyle. These streets belong to those who've adopted the customs of the empire, who speak in Latin or Greek, who decorate their homes with statues of Venus and Bacchus, and don't flinch when a woman laughs too loudly in public. The tension between cultures is obvious in every doorway, especially when it comes to sex. In Jewish quarters, purity is sacred, virginity is armour. But here, it's a curiosity at best, an inconvenience at worst. Greek and Roman customs around sexuality are built on different rules about dominance, not chastity. Consent is rarely mentioned. What matters is who's in control, who's the active partner, who's on top, so to speak, not just physically, but socially. You slip into a shaded courtyard where a Roman merchant is holding court at a dinner party. Reclining on cushions, he raises a goblet of watered wine and tells a joke that makes the entire group roar with laughter. Next to him is a woman with her hair braided in gold wire, her robe barely tied, sipping from his cup. She's not his wife, probably not even a courtesan in the formal sense, just someone he likes to be seen with, and no one cares, no one gasps, no one clutches their pearls. In this crowd, that's not scandal, that's style. You hear stories about these people in the Jewish quarters. They're spoken of in tones that mix judgment with envy. They have no shame, the elders say. They worship pleasure. And in some ways, they're right. In the Roman worldview, the body isn't something to hide. It's something to use, to celebrate, to control, especially if you're wealthy and male. Roman men are allowed, encouraged even, to enjoy sex outside of marriage, with slaves, with prostitutes, with other men, as long as they maintain the dominant role. It's not about orientation, it's about status. A free Roman citizen being penetrated is shameful, but a citizen penetrating a servant, that's just Tuesday. The contrast with Jewish laws is jarring. In the temple, sex is sacred, reserved, tightly regulated. In the bathhouses of the Greco-Roman district, it's casual, public even. You pass one of those bathhouses now, steam rising through the open roof, the scent of perfumed oil heavy in the air. Inside, men bathe, massage one another, flirt, argue about politics, and sometimes disappear behind curtained alcoves. Fringe fact, some of these bathhouses double as brothels, with rooms rented by the hour and a menu of options painted discreetly near the entrance. The services are offered with no shame. In fact, one Roman governor once claimed his region was blessed with pleasure and wisdom in equal measure, as if the two were interchangeable. But even in this libertine atmosphere, things aren't equal. Women have more social freedom here, yes, but they're still often seen as property. Respectable Roman wives are expected to be modest and loyal. But courtesans, dancers and actresses, they move freely, wield influence through wit and charm, and are often educated in ways Jewish women could only dream of. Some even write poetry. Some own property. A few, famously, have Roman senators eating out of their hands, literally. Still, most are there to be used, valued for their beauty, not their minds. And if they age, or speak out of turn, or demand too much, they're replaced. The patriarchy just wears a toga here. The vocabulary is different, but the system is the same. You overhear a conversation between two young Greek women at a stall selling jewellery. One is complaining about a Roman man she entertained last week. "He promised a necklace," she says, holding up her empty wrist. "He gave me a lecture instead." The other laughs and shrugs. "Welcome to Rome, darling." They move on, arms linked. It would be easy to romanticize this part of the city, to think of it as freer, more modern. But the freedom here is selective. Men have options, women have expectations, and anyone outside the standard gender roles, they walk carefully, if they walk at all. You find a small shrine tucked into a garden, dedicated to Venus, goddess of love and desire. Offerings are scattered at her feet. Pomegranates, coins, a strand of hair. A young couple is kneeling in front of the statue, whispering a prayer for fertility, maybe passion. The girl is barely more than a teenager. The boy looks terrified. You wonder if they're newly married, or just trying not to be discovered. In Rome's eyes, sex isn't dirty. It's inevitable. It's expected. But only in the right context, with the right power dynamic. Violate that, and the punishment comes swiftly. Not from priests, but from society. You lose status, reputation, masculinity even. The cultural stakes are different, but the game feels familiar, just wrapped in silk instead of wool. And while the Jewish community looks down on this moral decay, some of their sons sneak into this quarter after dark. Not just for sex, for freedom, for the chance to breathe without being watched. Some never return. Others come back and beg forgiveness, ritually bathing and fasting, the oil still clinging faintly to their skin. You leave the Greco-Roman district with more questions than answers. What's worse, rigid control or performative freedom? A system that punishes desire outright, or one that sells it under layers of power and coin? As the city narrows around you again, the torches flickering against clay walls, you realise something unsettling. Neither culture is safe. They just choose different masks for the same game. In one, sex is sin. In the other, it's sport. And in both, the people with the least power bear the greatest cost. You head west as the sun begins to fall behind the hills, dragging long shadows across the ground like dark silk. The noise of the marketplace thins, the priests retreat to the temple's inner courts, and the Roman soldiers begin their lazy evening patrols. Bored, restless, jangling coins in their palms like they're waiting for something better to do. And maybe they are. Because as night falls in the city, a different kind of whisper begins to float through the air. One that's quieter than scandal but just as dangerous. One that speaks of the people who live outside all the expectations, who love outside the script entirely. You hear it in code, you see it in sideways glances. Same-sex relationships existed here. Yes, even in 30 AD, but they were never truly safe. They existed like moss in a hidden corner of a cistern, present, persistent, but out of sight. And like everything else in this world, the experience depends on who you are, what body you were born into, and who gets to tell your story. If you're a man in the Roman world, things get complicated fast. Roman men, especially elite ones, were allowed to engage in same-sex acts under specific conditions. The critical rule was always about status. You could be the penetrator, you could not be the penetrated. The first was a demonstration of power, the second, a mark of submission. One was acceptable, the other humiliating. This wasn't about desire, it was about dominance. An elite Roman could sleep with a male slave or prostitute and still be considered respectable, as long as he maintained the active role. No love, no romance, just hierarchy in a different costume. You hear the story from a linen merchant's son. He's 17, curious, and far too bold for his own good. He tells you about a Roman officer who keeps a beautiful young boy in his house. A Syrian, he whispers, quiet, like a shadow, doesn't speak unless told to. You ask if they're in love and he laughs. Love? Number. That's not how it works. And he's right. It's not about love, not publicly. That kind of affection, that kind of connection between equals, that gets dangerous. Even in Rome it's mocked, called unmanly, called weakness. Now shift across the city, into the Jewish districts, and the rules tighten like a rope. Same-sex relationships aren't just frowned upon, they're outlawed by scripture. Leviticus is clear, at least on the surface. A man lying with a man is an abomination. The punishment is death. That verse echoes through households and synagogues like thunder, quoted by elders, murmured by neighbours, etched into the minds of every boy as he's warned. Stay pure. Stay straight. But people are people, and desire doesn't check theology first. You meet a man who sells fish by the south gate. His hands are rough, his beard neatly trimmed, and when no one's watching, his eyes follow the younger men who pass, just for a second too long. You don't say anything. He doesn't either, but you both know. He's careful. He's survived this long by being careful. He married, had children. He keeps his longings folded up like a secret letter tucked in his sandal. He doesn't act on them, not anymore, but he still prays late at night that God understands. There's no place for him in the law, no sanctuary, no path to redemption. He's not a rebel. He's He's not a heretic. He's just a man trying to breathe in a world that tells him every breath is wrong. Women too find ways to carve space for love outside the norm, but it's harder to trace. There are fewer laws explicitly targeting female same-sex relationships, partly because no one bothered to write them. In a patriarchal society, women's lives were so thoroughly controlled, their agency so routinely dismissed, that their desires were simply not considered, but they existed. You hear about two widows who share a house near the edge of town, no children, no male guardian. They make pottery, sell olive oil, eat meals together, sleep in the same room. Some call it companionship. Others whisper unnatural. But no one acts, not yet, because they're quiet, useful, invisible. There's a fringe theory among modern historians that certain female friendships from antiquity were actually long-term romantic relationships, disguised under layers of euphemism. Sisterhood, shared mourning, celibacy. Words that protected them. Words that hid the truth, maybe even from themselves. But some people are not quiet. Some don't want to be. In one village, a young man is dragged from his father's house and beaten in the street. No trial, no questions, just a rumour. Someone said he touched another boy. That was enough. He survives. Barely. His family sent him away. The town pretends he never existed. You ask someone about it later and they shrug. He brought it on himself. That's the real fear here. Not the act, not the sin, the visibility. The crime isn't love. The crime is being seen. You stop by a well near the outer wall. A young woman is drawing water alone. Rare. Her robe is plain, but her gaze is steady. She watches you, then looks past you, to where another girl stands waiting beneath a fig tree. They nod to each other. Nothing more. But you catch it. The signal. The rhythm. The secret pulse between two people who understand that the world has no space for them. So they carve one in silence. There are no words for who they are. No names. No categories. Just danger and longing and the knowledge that if they are caught, no one will care what their hearts said. The law won't ask questions. The neighbours won't offer protection. Even the priests, if they find out, will only offer one path. Shame, punishment, and repentance. Not understanding, not mercy. Fringe fact. There are rare scrolls, half erased, damaged by time, that mention men who forsake women and women who defy their nature. No context, no author, just scraps. And maybe that's fitting. Because in 30 AD, love like this exists in the margins, and yet it exists. It hides in glances, in coded phrases, in quiet dinners and shared rooms and fingers brushed too quickly. It is forbidden, yes, but also fearless. Because to love against the law, against the world, is the most dangerous and the most human thing of all. You walk back into the city as the stars rise. The world remains the same, laws are unchanged, the temple gates still guarded, and judgment still sharp as stone. But in the corners, in the spaces no one watches closely enough, something softer blooms. It doesn't ask permission, it just survives. The sun rises slow and pale over Jerusalem, and the first thing you hear isn't birds or footsteps. It's metal. Chains. Not heavy ones. Not the kind that rattle with punishment, but lighter, thinner. Made to be discreet. Made to be worn. They belong to the people who don't get to decide what happens to their bodies. The people who, legally and culturally, aren't people at all. They're property. Slaves. And when it comes to sex in 30 AD, their stories are the darkest and the most often erased. Slavery in the Roman Empire is vast, complex, and brutally normalized. By the time you wake this morning, 1 in every 3 people around you is likely enslaved. They work the vineyards, they grind grain, they carry water, they raise children who aren't theirs, and many, far too many, are used for sex. You walk through a courtyard where 3 women are scrubbing floors with broken nails and distant eyes. One wears a collar, the others have iron bracelets, light enough to move freely, heavy enough to remind them who they belong to. A man in a fine robe steps past them without a glance. One of the women flinches, not because he's touched her, but because she's used to being watched, touched, summoned. In Roman law, enslaved people have no rights. Not over their labour, not over their children, not over their bodies, A master can use them however he wants, at night, in public, during a feast. No crime is committed, no shame is attached. There is no such thing as rape of a slave, because consent isn't considered a factor. They can't say yes, but they also can't say no. You visit a merchant's house where the master boasts, not about his livestock, but about the youth of his new servant girl. 12 summers, he says proudly. Bright eyes, fast learner. He doesn't say what she's learning, but everyone in the room knows. The laughter is quiet. Ugly. If a slave becomes pregnant by her master, the child is also a slave. There are no exceptions. There's no inheritance. Even if the master favours her, even if he offers gifts or special treatment, the moment she's no longer desirable, she can be sold, or discarded, or killed, and no one will answer for it. There's a fringe tale about a Roman widow who fell in love with her own slave. She promised to marry him, freed him, dressed him in fine clothes, even called him her equal at a banquet. Her family was horrified. They took her to court. She lost everything, not because she loved beneath her station, but because she dared to claim he could choose her back. But that's the outlier. Most slave relationships aren't romantic. They're transactions, a master's power, embodied in someone else's skin. Some are performed in secret. Others are joked about publicly. Men brag about their conquests as if naming horses. They say the Egyptian, the Nubian with the scar, the kitchen girl who sings. Names aren't required. And what about the women? The enslaved girls, the boys, the young men traded between households like furniture. They don't speak, not because they don't want to, but because no one listens. The system doesn't need their voices. It only needs their compliance. In some households, these violations are woven into the daily rhythm. A slave is expected to clean the house, feed the children, and satisfy the master. If the mistress knows, she may ignore it, or beat the girl herself, because even then the blame falls on the slave. She seduced him. She tempted him. Never mind the fear in her eyes. Never mind the bruises. You walk past a row of market stalls where a slave auction is taking place. It's small, informal. A few boys stand on platforms, their tunics too short, their eyes blank. A man tests one's teeth. Another lifts the hem of a girl's robe, inspecting her thighs like checking for blemishes on fruit. You feel bile rise in your throat, but no one else reacts. This is normal. This is how things work. Jewish law has its own rules about slavery. Technically, Jewish slaves are to be freed after 6 years. Female slaves have some protections if sold into marriage. There are passages urging kindness, even compassion. But in practice, the laws are riddled with loopholes. A slave can be reclassified. Punishments vary. And non-Jewish slaves, they fall under Roman authority anyway, which means all the worst freedoms of ownership still apply. You hear the story of a young slave boy who tried to run away after a night with his master. He was caught 2 miles outside the city, hiding in an abandoned cistern. When they brought him back, the master didn't punish him. He smiled. "What would he do without me?" he said. The boy was placed back in service the same night. There's no justice, no recourse, and worst of all, no shame. Enslaved bodies aren't even considered participants in sex. They're objects, receptacles. Blame is only assigned if they resist. You meet a woman, older now, freed years ago, who once served in the house of a wealthy Sadducee. She doesn't describe what happened directly, but her words come slowly, wrapped in pauses. "He called it favour," she says. "He said I should be honoured, that my womb was blessed." She has a son now, pale eyes, dark skin, no name on the father's record. She tried to keep the boy, raised him herself, but he was taken at 10, sold off when debts came calling. She hasn't seen him since. Fringe fact, some Roman households kept sex slaves specifically, boys and girls trained, from childhood to serve guests at banquets in more ways than one. They were dressed like dancers, perfumed, taught to smile no matter what. Some were given nicknames, none were given freedom. The scholars who write about this time often don't focus on the slaves. They track the politics, the temple debates, the speeches. But the truth is, none of that would function without the invisible class holding it up. Cooking, cleaning, raising children, and silently absorbing the lust of their masters. You leave the market as the last of the sunlight vanishes. A few slaves sweep the steps outside the synagogue, their hands moving mechanically. One of them glances up at you. His face is blank, but his eyes, they burn. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. Because in 30 AD, the price of silence is survival. And, for some, survival is the only thing they're ever allowed to choose. You wake to the sound of sandals scuffing stone and temple bells echoing in the distance. Light, rhythmic, ceremonial. Another day, another sacrifice. Somewhere someone's already laid down a dove or a lamb, hoping to wipe away some moral smudge they didn't choose but now have to answer for. That's the way of things here. Guilt by association, by suspicion, by the simple fact of being human. And nowhere does that play out more dramatically than in the realm of public accusation. The theatre of shame. This society doesn't just punish sin, it displays it. You find yourself drawn to a square where a crowd has gathered. Not a marketplace crowd, but the kind that signals something's about to happen. A woman stands in the centre, head covered, arms bound loosely in front of her with a faded sash. She isn't screaming. She isn't crying. That was probably done hours ago. Now she just stares at the ground, unmoving, her hair falling out of its pins. No one's throwing stones. Not yet. This isn't an execution. It's a ritual humiliation. What's often called a public rebuke, a shaming. The elders say it's merciful, a chance for repentance. But there's nothing merciful about the way people stare at her, about the mother who yanks her child away like impurity is contagious. This is punishment before punishment. You learn the charge from the murmurs. Adultery, they say, caught in the act. Never mind that the man involved is nowhere to be seen. He's protected, or vanished, or just not considered the real issue here. She's the scandal. She's the proof that the walls between order and chaos are thin and female-shaped. Under Jewish law, adultery, meaning a married woman having sexual relations with anyone other than her husband, is a capital offence. For her, the man, only if she was married. If he was married and slept with an unmarried woman, it's considered inappropriate, sure. But adultery, that's a woman's crime. And before you ask, yes, this is deeply, irreversibly one-sided. There are 3 required things for a capital conviction. 2 witnesses, warning before the act, and a confession or evidence. But in practice, it's slippery. A man might simply accuse his wife. The elders might pressure her. Confess, and the punishment will be lighter, they say. And sometimes, lighter just means a quicker death. Or worse, expulsion. You follow the procession as she's led through the streets. Not to the temple, but away from it. Past the homes of people who once spoke to her. Past shops where she used to buy dates and almonds. People avoid her eyes now, but their stares linger anyway. This is how social death happens, not all at once. In pieces. There's a man beside her, he's not touching her, he doesn't have to. He's holding a scroll, likely the written charge, and he reads from it every few blocks. Not loudly, just enough. That people can hear the words defilement and shame, uncleanness. They become a rhythm, a melody of condemnation, like liturgy, but meaner. You recall another case, not long ago, a teenage girl whose betrothed found her talking to a soldier behind his father's vineyard. No touching, no confession, just proximity. He accused her of indecency. She was locked in a room for 3 days while the elders deliberated. She said she was only asking for directions. They said she was bold, disrespectful, dangerous. She wasn't executed. She was sent away. No husband, no family, gone. There's a fringe practice in some villages where accused women are made to stand barefoot on hot stones, to burn the lie away. If they cry out, it's taken as guilt. If they remain silent, they're believed. Unless someone just feels they're lying. It's a spectacle, a test of purity disguised as justice. And always, the man's name is a footnote. You reach the edge of the city where a wall stands, old, pocked with age, a place where these ceremonies tend to end. She'll be left here for a while. Maybe a day, maybe 3. People will pass, some will throw things, others will pretend not to see. And if her family's merciful, they'll come for her under cover of night. If not, she'll disappear. The open debate among scholars is whether this system really reflects Mosaic law, or if it's been twisted, inflated by fear and control over time. The Torah is exacting, yes, but much of what you're seeing, this ritual humiliation, this theatre of female guilt, feels more cultural than scriptural. like a layer added on, calcified by years of male interpretation. You meet an older woman nearby who once went through something similar. She was lucky, she says. Her husband defended her, claimed it was a misunderstanding, paid off the witnesses. Mercy, she says, though her voice is brittle. He let me live. But after that she was never touched again, never spoken to the same way. Alive, she repeats, but not allowed to live. And so the woman at the wall waits, not just for rescue, for permission, for someone to say, you're still worthy, you're still human. But the law doesn't deal in worthiness. It deals in violations. It's the same city that demanded stones for the woman brought before the teacher. The same city where public morality hangs like incense, choking, sweet, heavy with judgment. That moment, the one where he knelt in the dust and asked, "Who among you is without sin?" It feels like a myth here, like a cool breeze remembered during a drought. Because what you're watching now isn't about justice. It's about control, about fear, about making sure every other woman in the city thinks twice before being seen speaking too long to the wrong man, or walking alone at dusk, or laughing too freely. You walk away slowly, trying not to draw attention. The square behind you fades into the sounds of daily life. Vendors shouting, carts rattling, water splashing into jugs, and somewhere behind that wall, a woman stares at nothing and waits to be forgiven for being visible. In 30 AD, shame isn't just a consequence, it's a system. The temple looms ahead, rising like a mountain of white stone and gold, glowing against the late morning sun. From a distance it looks peaceful, majestic even. A place of law, of tradition, of divine presence. But as you move closer, weaving through crowds of pilgrims and merchants and priests, the tension thickens like smoke. You feel it in the way the guards eye the people, especially the women. You hear it in the subtle change in tone when someone speaks too boldly. This is sacred ground, but it's also a place where lines are drawn, and today you're crossing into one of the most controversial of those lines. The temple's obsession with female purity. Not moral purity, ritual purity. The kind that can be undone by biology, by accident, or just by being born with a uterus. You pause at the outer courts and watch as women are carefully separated from the main flow of the crowd. There's no curtain or sign, just subtle guidance, gestures, glances, a polite but firm, "this way." The court of the women isn't an insult on paper. It's framed as protection, as tradition, a space set aside for prayer and offering. But what it really is, when you stand in it, is a limit. This is as far as you go, no further. You hear the conversations around you, all whispered but urgent. A girl asking her mother if she's allowed to enter after her bleeding ended. A newlywed nervously checking her robe to make sure it's unstained. Another woman holding a dove in a basket, an offering after childbirth, required before she's allowed to rejoin the community of the clean. Ritual impurity, according to Levitical law, isn't a sin. But here in 30 AD, the line between impurity and sin is so blurry that people treat them as one and the same. A menstruating woman is considered tame, unclean. So is a woman who has recently given birth, or who touches a dead body, or who has sex, even with her husband. All of these things require a period of separation, followed by immersion in a mikveh, and sometimes a sacrificial offering. You watch as a woman is gently turned away at one of the temple gates. She doesn't argue. She just nods and steps back. She knew it might happen. Her cycle started a day early. She'd hoped no one would notice. But the priest saw something. Maybe her gait, maybe her unease, and he stopped her. Just like that. Barred from sacred space because of something she can't control. Some women take pride in their observance. They count the days. They follow every rule. Not out of fear, but because it makes them feel connected. To tradition, to holiness, to order. But for many others, these rules feel like exile, like being reminded every month that their bodies are suspect, that something inside them is dangerous. There's a fringe belief, whispered in some corners, that a woman who dies during menstruation must be buried outside the usual grounds. She returns to the earth impure, they say. The priests deny it, of course. Officially, burial rites apply to all the same, but there are stories of bodies rejected, funerals delayed, a family's grief stretched into something colder by technicality. You meet a woman near the wall of offerings, Her name is Tzipora. She's brought a pair of doves in a basket lined with straw. She gave birth 8 weeks ago. Her son survived, thank God. She's here to complete the purification process. She explains it plainly. 40 days for a boy, 80 for a girl. You ask why the difference, and she shrugs. Girls are heavier with impurity. That's what the rabbis say. Heavier with impurity. It sits like a stone in your chest. She's not angry. This is just her life. She does what she's told. She's grateful to be allowed back into the temple. But she also admits something, quietly, eyes downcast. When she gave birth to her second daughter, she cried more for the 40 extra days she'd have to wait than for the pain of the delivery itself. I wanted to be clean again, she says. I wanted to go home. That's the weight of it. Not the blood, not the sacrifice, the waiting, the shame, the knowledge that your sacredness comes with an asterisk. You pass through the court of the women and glance toward the inner courts, the parts you can't enter. A few men stand there, heads bowed, pressing prayers into the cracks of stone. They look serene, focused, whole. No one checks their garments. No one asks if they've recently had sex or touched a dead animal. The laws exist for them too, in theory, but the scrutiny falls elsewhere. Because here, a man is pure unless proven otherwise. A woman is impure unless she can prove she's not. There's a corner of the temple courtyard where old women sit beneath the columns, talking in soft tones. They've been through all of it. The cycles, the births, the losses, the ritual baths, the rejections, and they talk like survivors, like sages. One of them laughs and says she once bribed a mikveh attendant with figs to let her in early. Another admits she faked her period once to get out of a public festival. The humour is dry, knowing. Beneath it, pain. Fringe detail. A priest once tried to introduce a cloth-checking ritual to verify whether women were truly finished with their cycle before temple entry. It didn't catch on, but the idea lingered. Another version, practiced briefly in a few towns, involved husbands attesting to their wives' purity. As if the body wasn't evidence enough. As if truth had to be spoken by a man. You step back into the crowd, your skin prickling with awareness. The temple is beautiful, yes, but it's also a machine. And like all machines, it runs best when people behave predictably. Women who bleed, who birth, who cry out or challenge or question. They interrupt the flow. So the rules keep them quiet, separated, cleaned. But cleanliness doesn't always mean safety. It doesn't mean justice. It just means you've passed the test. For now. You leave the temple courts as midday bells ring out. The sun burns higher in the sky. Another woman is being turned away at the gate. She doesn't argue. She just nods. She'll come back tomorrow. Because in 30 AD, holiness isn't always about the soul. Sometimes it's just about the body. And who gets to declare it clean? The afternoon stretches long and heavy, the heat pressing down like a thick blanket, pulling sweat from your skin and patience from your bones. The streets thin out a little. Families retreat indoors, shutters close. Even the animals seem to nap. But not everyone gets to rest. Especially not the women lined up along the southern ridge of the city wall, just beyond the eyes of the temple, just beyond the reach of the law. They stand in shaded corners or sit on worn rugs, back straight, eyes half lowered, waiting, watching. You're standing at the edge of what most people call the valley market. But everyone knows what it really is. The red zone, the fringe, the place where good men don't linger too long unless they're pretending they got lost on the way to the spice vendor. This is where the prostitutes work. Don't flinch. You've been wandering through the laws, the loopholes, the rituals. You've watched wives be shamed, slaves be violated, and widows disappear. This is just the next turn of the wheel. The oldest profession doesn't exist here by accident. It exists because everything else is forbidden, regulated or hidden. Someone's got to soak up the overflow. There's a common myth that prostitution in 30 AD was rare or hushed. Not true. It was regulated, controlled, hidden in plain sight, and if you want to understand it, you have to let go of modern labels. These women aren't all destitute. They're not all coerced. Some are slaves, yes. Others are free women who couldn't afford another option. A few are priestesses, though that word means something very different here, tangled up in foreign cults and secret rites. And some chose this. Not because they loved it, but because it gave them a kind of freedom no marriage ever could. You meet one of them now, her name, real or not, is Suri. She's older than you expect. Not ancient, just seasoned. Her eyes scan without apology. Her robe is dyed modestly but well, her hair oiled and pinned with care. She leans against a wall near the edge of the shade and tells you flatly, "I sell time, not just flesh." She doesn't sound ashamed. She sounds matter of fact. "Men come here because they can talk," she says, "touch, be seen without being judged." And then she adds, almost as a joke, "Except by God, I suppose." The irony, according to the law, there's no death, penalty for prostitution. It's condemned, yes, shamed, but not outlawed in the same way adultery is. Because again, the woman's status matters. A wife, bound, a harlot, loose. And if a man sleeps with a harlot, he's indulging in a vice, sure, but not committing adultery, unless he's married. But even then, it's seen as less wrong than betraying a husband's rights. It's warped. It always has been. Some women here wear headscarves, others don't. Some wait at night, some during daylight. A few are performers by trade, dancers, singers, who offer more after the music ends. It's a spectrum, not a monolith. And what surprises you most is how normal it feels. There are rules here too. Territory, fees, a shared whisper network to warn of dangerous men. This isn't chaos, it's survival, organised. And what of the clients? Some are Roman officers, bored and unburdened by Jewish guilt. Others are merchants passing through. But more than a few are temple men, Pharisees, scribes, pilgrims. The same voices that cry purity in the daylight are bargaining for pleasure once the sun dips low. You hear a story from one of the younger women, barely out of girlhood. Her name is Mara. She was sold to a brothel in Caesarea after her father died with debts unpaid. She says she cried the first week, then stopped. Now she says she's saving for her freedom. 10 more silver, she says, eyes distant. I want to open a bread stall. She smiles at the idea. Something clean. Clean. There it is again. The great obsession. As if selling food is holier than selling a body. As if both don't involve need, hunger, and the longing to be full again. There's a debate, still raging, among scholars about temple prostitution. Some claim it never existed in Israel, that it was a pagan import exaggerated by outsiders. Others argue it lingered at the edges, tolerated in foreign cities, maybe even protected in certain syncretic cults that blended fertility rituals with economic exchange. But even without temples, prostitution persisted, and always, it was women paying the spiritual bill for male appetite. Fringe fact, in some Hellenistic shrines, particularly those dedicated to Aphrodite or Astarte, young girls were initiated into womanhood through ritualized sex with strangers, framed as a sacred offering. The line between religious ecstasy and exploitation was paper thin, and sometimes written on the same scroll. You walk deeper into the alleyways, passing painted walls and incense burners, and the unmistakable scent of oil and sweat and perfume. Not unpleasant, just honest. The truth of bodies living hard, trading intimacy for coin, hoping no one they know walks by. But sometimes they want to be seen. Some of the women lean out, make eye contact, flirt without fear. Not because they're desperate, but because power, even temporary, even transactional, feels better than invisibility. You hear someone call a name from a doorway. A man steps out, adjusting his belt, face flushed. He doesn't look ashamed, he looks relieved, like he's done something normal, and maybe he has. Because this unspoken agreement between desire and denial, is built into the bones of the city. It's ancient, enduring, hypocritical, and quietly, endlessly profitable. There's a wall just outside the red zone covered in charcoal markings and scratch notes. You run your fingers across the symbols. Some are names, some are warnings. One reads simply, "She bled. He paid anyway." You stand there for a long time, staring at those 5 words, because they contain everything: pain, profit, disregard, survival. When you leave, Suri nods at you again. She doesn't say goodbye, she doesn't need to. You carry her story with you now, whether you want to or not, because in 30 AD, sex might be a sin, but only when the wrong person is doing it. And the wrong person is almost always her. It's evening now, and a hush settles over the city that feels almost sacred, like the earth itself has exhaled after a long, tense day. But you know better. Stillness doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it just means people are waiting for something to break. You drift toward the olive groves near the Mount of Olives, where the houses grow thinner and the air smells like crushed leaves and damp soil. It's quieter here, yes, but not gentler. This is where the old questions begin to stir. Not the ones written in scrolls, but the ones carved into human hearts, about guilt, about forgiveness, about what happens after. Because even in a world so obsessed with sin, punishment isn't the only story. There's another narrative whispered alongside the rules, a story of mercy, of second chances, and it starts in places like this, with teachers, prophets, radicals who dared to say that not all sinners deserve to die. You sit beneath a fig tree and someone tells you about him. Not by name at first, just the teacher. The rabbi who eats with prostitutes. The one who touched the lepers. It's clear who they mean. He's not a priest, not a Roman, not a Sadducee or a zealot. Just a man from Galilee with a sharp tongue and soft hands. And he's been saying things that shake the foundations. Things like, your sins are forgiven. Things like, let the one without sin cast the first stone. You think back to the woman you saw earlier, the one led through the streets, accused of adultery, abandoned to public judgment. In another part of the city, a story unfolds that sounds eerily familiar. A woman dragged before a teacher. The crowd ready, stones already in hand, and then the twist. The teacher kneels, writes in the dust, speaks not to the accused, but to the accusers. One line, just one, but it slices through the air like lightning. He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. Silence. One by one, the men drop their stones and walk away. And when they're gone, the teacher looks up, not with anger, not with condemnation. Just a quiet question. Has no one condemned you? And when she answers no, he says, then neither do I. Go and sin no more. It's radical, not just for its mercy, but for its refusal to play the game. He doesn't excuse her, he doesn't deny the law, but he exposes its imbalance. He refuses to let justice become a spectacle. He reframes it entirely. This story, half history, half miracle, is still debated. Scholars argue whether it was added later, whether it fits the original texts. Some say it was too gentle, too convenient. Others say that's exactly why it matters. But to the people who live under constant judgment, it's more than a theological debate. It's oxygen. You find a woman in the grove who remembers it firsthand. Or maybe she heard it from someone who was there. The details blur over time, but the point remains sharp. She says it changed how she looked at the law, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. We all have shadows, she says. The stones just make them louder. You stay quiet for a while, listening to the wind move through the branches. Somewhere in the distance someone is singing. A low, mournful tune. Maybe a prayer. Maybe just a song that survived the years. There's another layer to this too. Mercy, yes. But also resistance. Because what this teacher did wasn't just spiritual, it was political. To forgive a woman accused of adultery, to do it publicly, that's a challenge to the Sanhedrin, to Rome, to the very bones of the system. It's not just kindness, it's defiance. And it comes with a cost. You hear that some of his followers have gone missing, that others are watched, that people whisper his name at wells and over baking bread, careful not to speak too loudly. Because mercy, in a world like this, is dangerous. It disrupts the natural order. It suggests that sin isn't final, that punishment isn't always deserved, that love might be stronger than law. You pass by a well where two women are washing cloth. One of them is heavily pregnant. The other looks barely older than 15. They talk in low voices about their pasts, about shame, about escape, about starting over. And one of them says, he said we are not what they call us. You don't know if she's quoting that same teacher or someone else, but it doesn't matter. The idea is there, floating in the space between words. There's a growing tension in the city now, like something's about to snap. The priests are on edge, the Romans are restless, the people are holding their breath, and in the middle of it all this whisper, that sin doesn't have to end in death, that the system doesn't have to win. Fringe fact, there are reports, mostly second-hand, mostly discredited by the officials, that some women who had been cast out for adultery later became leaders in small gatherings of followers of this teacher, that they hosted meals, spoke openly, taught others. If true, it would be more than rebellion. It would be a rewriting of everything. You head back toward the city, passing through shadows that stretch long and gold across the stones. The sun is dipping low now, turning the sky a bruised purple. People begin lighting torches, closing shutters, saying prayers, and somewhere in the distance a man is telling a group of listeners that they are not their worst mistake, that they are still beloved, still sacred, even now. Because in 30 AD, punishment is easy. But forgiveness? That's revolution. The final night settles over the city like a slow breath, cool and quiet, folding itself around domed rooftops and crumbling alleyways, as if the very walls are sighing from holding in so much tension. Jerusalem at night is a different animal, less holy, less scripted, more human. You see fewer priests and more shadows. The stars blink down, unimpressed by your robes or your rituals. You walk without purpose now, just tracing the curve of this place one last time, your feet finding their own path through memory and dust. Because now, at the edge of this journey, you're not looking for law or judgment. You're looking for what's left behind. And that's when you hear it. Soft laughter. Not bawdy, not scandalous. Just two women sharing a joke as they carry baskets through a narrow street, robes swinging with the rhythm of their walk. You don't catch the words, but you don't need to. Their joy is quiet, ordinary, undeclared. But in a world obsessed with purity and obedience, even that is rebellion. You think back through everything you've seen: adulteresses dragged through the streets, slave girls with bruised ribs, lovers hiding in silence, temple guards turning women away with a glance. You've seen sex weaponized, commercialized, criminalized. You've seen it punished with stones, paid for with coin, and hidden behind prayer. But rarely, so rarely, have you seen it treated as what it actually is: human, complex, sometimes joyful, sometimes cruel, sometimes sacred, often all at once. And yet, despite all the shame, despite the rules etched into bone and parchment, it never disappears. Desire always finds a crack in the wall. It grows in the corners, in the margins, in the parts of the story no one writes down. You realise, standing in this final hour, that everything this society fears most about sex isn't the act itself. It's the freedom of it, the unpredictability, the refusal to stay in one form. They've built an entire system to control it. A fortress of laws, punishments, rituals, and yet still, a girl sneaks out to meet a boy. A man writes poetry for someone he's not allowed to love. A widow lights a candle in secret for the woman she lost. A slave closes her eyes and dreams for just a minute of saying no. You pass a row of homes, their windows glowing with candlelight. Behind one, you glimpse a couple dancing slowly to no music, just the rhythm of the day ending. Behind another, a mother scolds her daughter for speaking too boldly in front of the elders. In the next, a man sits alone, head in hands, wrestling with a desire he's been taught to hate. There's no single truth here, just stories stacked like bricks, some broken, some burning, some passed down like forbidden songs. You stop near the wall where judgment and forgiveness once collided. The woman accused of adultery, the teacher who stooped in the dust, the crowd that dispersed in shame. That moment hangs heavy here, like incense. It doesn't erase everything. It doesn't undo the pain. But it cracks the stone. It dares to say, maybe this isn't how it has to be. There's a fringe idea in some hidden circles that the laws about sex weren't meant to destroy but to protect, that they were warnings against misuse, not chains around intimacy, that somewhere, under the layers of fear and control, the original intention was gentler, holier, but time and men sharpened those laws into knives, and once sharpened, they rarely get put down. You make your way toward a small gathering just outside the city wall, a group of people seated around a fire sharing flatbread and wine. You recognise some of them. The woman from the market who smiled with her eyes, the fish seller with the quiet sadness, a servant boy you saw slip away with a soldier. They all sit together now, no judgment, no hierarchy, just warmth. One of them speaks about the teacher again, the one who ate with sinners, who healed women with bloody hands, who let a known prostitute weep at his feet and dry his skin with her hair, who didn't flinch when her touch marked him as unclean. That story matters here, because it didn't end with her shame, it ended with her being seen. You realise something in this moment. All the rituals, the laws, the stones, they were never about fixing the problem. They were about hiding it. Because to admit that sex is complicated, that love doesn't follow rules, that desire doesn't check pedigrees or purity charts, that's too risky. It disrupts the illusion that everything can be controlled. But the people gathered here, they know better. They know that love doesn't always look respectable, that survival isn't always clean, that sometimes healing means letting go of shame you never asked for. You watch as one of the women leans against the shoulder of another, their hands brushing. No one stares, no one gasps. It's just another form of comfort, of truth, of something real carved into a world of performance. And you think, maybe that's what redemption looks like. Not a temple sacrifice, not a law revised, but a fire shared, a story told, a hand held without fear, because in 30 AD, sex was a sin punishable by death. But sometimes, in the quiet, it was also a whisper of life, a reminder that the body is not the enemy, that love, even when forbidden, still deserves to be held, that shame doesn't have to be inherited, that not all stones need to be thrown. The fire crackles, someone hums a tune you don't recognise, a wind stirs the grass. You've seen the worst this time has to offer, and still, here, in this moment, hope exists, because people keep loving, even when they're told not to, and that changes everything. The fire burns low now, casting just enough light to see the outlines of faces still gathered in that quiet circle. Faces marked by time, grief, longing, and something else that doesn't quite have a name. You're not part of the group, not really. But no one asks you to leave, and maybe that's the point. Here, in this space where shame and law once ruled, something softer has taken root. Not lawlessness, not chaos, just the idea that maybe a person is more than their sins, their desires, their silence. Maybe survival itself is a kind of holiness. You lean back against a warm stone wall, close your eyes, and think about everything you've witnessed. The temple's perfection built on exclusion, the hypocrisy of the powerful, the terror etched into women's daily lives, the way sex has been used as both weapon and currency, the unbearable cost of being different, visible, or simply in the wrong body at the wrong time. You've walked through centuries packed into 1 year. You've seen what people can do with fear wrapped in scripture. But you've also seen what happens when someone dares to forgive, dares to stay, dares to say, "You're more than this." There's something about 30 AD that clings to you now. It's ancient but uncomfortably modern. The laws have changed, the stones have been dropped, but echoes remain. In the way people still judge bodies, still fear desire, still talk more about sin than grace. And yet, in the middle of all that noise, you remember the silence after the stones hit the ground, that moment when no one could condemn her, that breath between accusation and mercy. It's fragile, but it's enough to start something. So, you rise, stretch your legs, thank the fire for its warmth, and as you walk back into the darkness of the sleeping city, you carry a truth that no law can touch. You're not your worst moment. You're not what they called you. You're still here. And sometimes, surviving is the most radical thing of all.